Well, good morning, and can I welcome everyone to this, the first meeting of the Public Audit Committee in 2026. Agenda item 1 is for members of the committee to decide whether or not to take agenda items this morning 4, 5, 6 and 7 in private. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Thank you very much. And agenda item 2 for us this morning is further consideration of the 2023-24 audit of UHI Perth. And I'm very pleased to welcome our witnesses this morning. In part because of the weather, some of our witnesses are joining us online. But let me begin by welcoming Catherine Ettry, who is the acting interim Principal and Chief Executive of UHI Perth College. Alistair Wiley, who's the interim chair of UHI Perth College. Alistair is joining us online. You're very welcome, and thanks for taking the trouble to come along today. We are also joined in the meeting room by Lynn Murray, also from UHI Perth College, who's the Deputy Principal Operations at the college. Both joining us online for obvious weather reasons is Vicky Nairn, the Principal and Vice-Chancellor of UHI. Vicky, good morning and thanks for being with us. And Vicky is joined by Mike Baxter, who's the Chief Financial Officer at UHI. Can I welcome you? And for Alistair, Vicky and Mike, can I say to you, if there are any points at which you want to come in particularly, if you put in the chat that you want to join us, and we'll do our level best to pick that up and invite you in. Can I complete our welcome to witnesses by welcoming Jackie Braisted, who's the Director of Access Learning and Outcomes at the Scottish Funding Council. And alongside Jackie is Tiffany Ritchie, who's the Acting Director of Finance at the Scottish Funding Council. Please don't feel obliged to answer every single question that we've got when we raise them, and we'll try and manage proceedings as effectively as possible. We have got, as you would expect, some questions to put to you. But before I get to the questions, I'm going to invite Catherine Ettry, Vicky Nairn and Jackie Braisted to give us a short opening statement in that order. So I'm going to, first of all, invite Catherine to open proceedings for us. Catherine.
Thank you, Convener. Over the last 7 months, my focus has been to lead UHI Perth through the current financial crisis and to bring stability to the college. Finding just under £10 million of savings over the next 3 years has been very difficult, especially after several years of significant rounds of cuts and voluntary severance. However, I'm pleased to report that the college is now currently forecasting a surplus for the first time since 2022. To address the projected deficit, we needed to reaffirm the college's role as a catalyst for opportunity and adopt a sustainable growth strategy that is grounded in meeting the needs of our community. We have sought every non-staff saving possible, along with pursuing targeted growth in key areas. Unfortunately, it was not possible to completely avoid any voluntary redundancies, but our priority is and always will be ensuring our front-line teaching resource meets the needs of our students. In the last month, I have appointed a new Deputy Principal and a Chief Financial Officer, both with a combined experience of 30 years in the college sector, and we will focus on strengthening areas including governance and compliance as the college moves from a recovery to a renewal phase. Colleges across Scotland are facing significant financial pressures, and this has severely impacted the situation at Perth. A 20% cut in college funding in real terms in recent years, combined with inflation and sustained high energy costs, along with a large, ageing, poorly maintained estate, has created an extremely difficult financial situation for Perth. There continues to be significant risk to our financial sustainability and for the entire college sector. As an educator of over 35 years, I believe we have reached the lowest point of funding. The college sector can no longer sustain this without serious impact on our communities. We remain committed to delivering both further and higher education to the community of Perth and Kinross and beyond, and we are working with our stakeholders to deepen our key partnerships. Over many years, I've witnessed how colleges can transform lives, create diverse routes into higher education and employment, address the shortages of skilled staff and develop and promote routes that train for industry needs. However, they can only do this with appropriate resources. Despite our financial challenges, the staff at UHI Perth continue to deliver outstanding education for our students and our community, and we remain one of the best performing colleges in Scotland. Our student achievement and satisfaction rates are consistently higher than the sector norm. I have been very proud to lead the college over the last 7 months and remain committed and passionate about ensuring we continue to deliver the very best for our students and communities. I would like to thank the committee for allowing us to provide evidence here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to turn straight away, if I could, to Vicky Nairn for your opening statement. Vicky.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. I wasn't able to unmute myself there. Firstly, apologies we're not with you in person. As you mentioned, convener, we've got some pretty severe weather up here in the Highlands. I wish to begin by reaffirming that UHI, in its role as the regional strategic body, fully recognises the seriousness of the issues highlighted in the Section 22 report and the challenges that have been faced by UHI Perth. We very much welcome the scrutiny of this committee and the role of Audit Scotland in ensuring transparency and accountability in the use of public funds. UHI, as a university partnership, is a high-performing tertiary institution with student success and satisfaction consistently rated above the sector average in both further and higher education. I would also specifically like to highlight the work of the new leadership team, the board and the staff who've taken significant steps to stabilise and improve the situation in UHI Perth. The RSB has and continues to take positive steps to support UHI Perth through this period of change, including enhanced monitoring and assurance measures, ongoing and detailed interaction with the Scottish Funding Council, deployment of senior executive expertise, provision of independent financial consultancy to support recovery planning, facilitated governance improvements, and the information pack which UHI has submitted seeks to clarify UHI's role, responds to information provided at previous meetings, and provides related correspondence. In UHI, our goal is to protect and enhance the student experience, maintain high standards of education, and continue to deliver transformational impacts for the people, communities and economies of our regions. The financial challenges faced by UHI Perth are not unique to the college or indeed to the partnership, but are reflective of broader and longer-standing sectoral challenges which have clearly been highlighted in recent national reports from both Audit Scotland and the SFC. We, of course, continue to engage constructively with the SFC and national bodies to represent UHI in these matters for the benefit of both UHI and the wider FE and HE sectors. Looking ahead, UHI and the RSB's focus is on stability, governance, renewal and growth. And through our 2030 strategic plan, we are developing a new operating model, a more efficient and integrated institution, one that seeks to direct more resources to students, enhance services for communities, and in turn ensure long-term financial sustainability. Thank you, convener.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to turn to the Scottish Funding Council and invite Jackie Braisted to give us your opening statement. Jackie.
Thank you, convener, and good morning to you and to committee members. So I'm Jackie Braisted, Director of Access, Learning and Outcomes at the Scottish Funding Council, and I'm joined by Tiffany Ritchie, Acting Director of Finance, and we welcome Audit Scotland's 23-24 audit of UHI Perth and the opportunity to give evidence to the Public Audit Committee today. SFC takes extremely seriously Audit Scotland's Section 22 reports, and this report set out concerning findings regarding UHI Perth's financial controls, notably the failure to set a budget. To gain assurance about the issues identified in the report, SFC has engaged closely with UHI as the regional strategic body, and UHI has in turn engaged with Perth College. This approach is in line with the governance arrangements set out in the legislation. When an institution is experiencing financial or governance challenges, there are already several levers and interventions available to SFC and to UHI as the RSB via relevant legislation, as well as the financial memoranda that set out our conditions of funding. We are also enhancing our approach to institutional scrutiny given the increasingly challenging financial environment. To launch our new approach, we published our expectations of good governance in autumn 2025, which announced additional monitoring of institutions. We will continue to build on this work, strengthening our governance and financial monitoring, and we're committed to continued engagement with the college sector, including UHI as the RSB, regarding this work. SFC acknowledges the steps taken by UHI and by Perth College to address the issues set out in Audit Scotland's report. We also welcome the college's response to its wider financial sustainability challenges so that it continues to be a thriving institution for learners, employers and the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I ask each of you in turn whether you accept the findings that are set out in the Audit Scotland Section 22 report, beginning with Catherine Ettrick?
Yes, we absolutely accept the findings and what we've been doing over the last 7 months. In fact, what Lynn has been doing over the last year is absolutely working with her team to ensure that we have absolutely covered all the bases in terms of making the improvements that are required. That will never happen again, and it certainly has not something that has happened since. There are many procedures in place that should have been in place at the time, but have now all the checks and balances, and we're confident that there are many improvements that have been made.
Okay, I'll come back to that in a moment. Can I turn to Vicky Nairn and ask you, as the Principal and Vice-Chancellor of UHI, whether you accept the findings of the Audit Scotland report?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, absolutely, we do.
Thank you for your succinctness. Jackie Braisted.
Yes, we accept the findings as well.
Right, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, well, can I then just look a little bit more closely as not just to what happened, but what the approach was that led to this Section 22 report. I mean, you may have seen that we took evidence before Christmas from the former chair of the board, Graham Watson, and from Ian Wishart, who was a former Vice Principal Operations at UHI Perth. And as a follow-up to their oral evidence, they wrote to us giving further testimony of how things got to where they got to. And Mr Watson said in his letter to me as the convener of this committee on the 4th of December, in the board's view, it would have been neither prudent nor good governance practice to agree a deficit budget when there was no certainty of how the deficit would be funded. ... As a result, no budget was agreed. I don't know whether Lynn Murray or Catherine Ettrick, you want to comment on that.
I think Lynn wants to comment on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've worked in the public sector for many years, and setting a budget is, you know, an essential for what you do in terms of good financial control and governance. However, you took the evidence from colleagues, and there were circumstances at the time that came to that decision. I wasn't there at the time, so it's not really up to me to, to comment on that.
Okay, but you were in attendance at a Board of Management meeting on the 23rd of October 2024, whereas I read the minute on page 8. It says, board member expressed concern at how quickly the position has moved for the worse since the June board passed the savings plan and would not be comfortable passing a budget. I mean, so this is as recently as October 2024, when you were in attendance at that meeting, people on the board were expressing that view.
Yeah, that's right. And it's important to let you know the context of what we're experiencing at UHI Perth at the time. I started in February 2024, and Ian Wishart was my predecessor, so he left in March 2024. And it had been identified for quite a while that resources in the finance team were not as they should be, and looking for additional resource. And certainly me coming in fresh to it, I had highlighted that it was a strategic risk, really, if we didn't have sufficient resources in place, because it was, particularly in times of severe financial challenge, it was important to have accurate and timely financial information. So that this was recognised, and by the middle of June, a new structure had been agreed, and it was agreed that I could go ahead. But again, just to put in context, over a period of 9 months, from December 23, 3 out of the 4 members of the accounting team had left. So in terms of corporate memory, in terms of knowledge of what was in place, also, because the team had always been under pressure, there hadn't been time to, fully document processes and procedures. Systems, weren't quite as they should be. Sometimes in times of financial pressure, it's investment in systems that can suffer from that. So, and also the Director of Finance had only been in place since May 2024. So we were trying to get our heads around the position and trying to, with very, very few staff, within the finance team, as I've outlined. So when it came to setting the budget for 24-25, we had just finished a collective consultation in the middle of June 24. There were big changes. There were quite significant reductions in the senior leadership team and in the layer below that, if you like. And people were taking on remits. So even in terms of the budget holders, they didn't have that corporate knowledge either. So in terms of setting the budget, it was very difficult in that context.
But do you accept what the Auditor General told us when he gave evidence in October? I mean, he said, he was quite stark. He said, I cannot recall from my time in this role and during my career of auditing public bodies in Scotland an organisation that has not prepared an annual budget.
Yeah, well, that was for 23-24. As I say, that was before I joined the organisation. But in 24-25, and you highlighted at the meeting in October 2024, we did have a draft budget. And because it was that was the first time that we were able to prepare it, because of the work in the work streams, the consultation. At that time, it wasn't approved by the board because they felt uncomfortable about the deficit position, and they asked for more information. So that was provided by December 24, and the budget was approved. We also we've had a letter of comfort from the SFC as well in terms of the financial statements, and because we had a cash advance, a funding advance of £1.5 million, then we also had a letter from SFC supporting that as well, and what the terms and conditions of that would be. So I think that gave a bit of comfort to the board as well.
Okay, well, the SFC has been mentioned there. Could I ask Jackie Braisted what your view is of what happened with the failure to set a budget? And I know you've said in your submission that because of the nature of the Regional Strategic Board, you didn't have direct access into the college.
Indeed, and we don't. We work through UHI. But on the financial matters, if I may pass to Ms Ritchie, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you. So, yeah, I would say the SFC view is it's clear in the SPFM, the Scottish Public Finance Manual, that all public bodies should set a budget. It's a fundamental financial control. And we ask that they demonstrate clear, sound, robust financial management. And that requires an assessment against a budget. So we share Audit Scotland's view. This is a significant failure. My experience, most of us chartered accountants, experience across public and private sectors, this is unprecedented, and it must remain so. We must and we will ensure that this never happens again.
Thanks again, that's very clear. Alistair Wiley, I'm bound to ask you, because you are now the interim chair of the board, but you were, over this period of time, also a member of the board. And can he confirm whether or not you were a member of the board that did not set a budget in 23-24?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I was at that point in time, and I think it's worth pointing out that there was a lot of consternation and disagreement on the board, which I don't think has perhaps been adequately captured due to the failure to set a budget. As many other people have already commented, I share that history of working in public service, working in education for a long time. I don't ever recall, being in a situation where a budget wasn't set. There was certainly consternation about setting a deficit budget, but that's not an unprecedented move to set a deficit budget. So yes, there were many people on the board who were not in agreement with the direction of travel.
But did it go to a vote, for example? You know, how was that concern expressed?
I think it was my recollection, and obviously, as you'll appreciate, I'm speaking from my time on the board when I was an independent board member and not responsible for the board. But my recollection is there was verbal disagreement that was expressed quite strongly. But I think that also plays to, if you like, the position that I found myself in when I took over as interim chair in April 2025. That one of the things I wanted to immediately address were some of the governance issues. So I think it points back to that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to finally return to Catherine Ettry and Lynn Murray. I mean, again, following the evidence we took in December, we got a note from Ian Wishart where he wrote to us in what I thought was quite an extraordinary way. He had a section in his letter where he posed the question, how useful is a budget? And he gave a 3-point A to C list of reasons why it's not especially useful to set a budget. He says, while I fully understand doing budgets, they are only one tool within financial planning and do have weaknesses. So I suppose, Lynn Murray, as his successor, I'm asking you the question, do you agree with that?
I've worked many years in public sector, as I said, and a budget has always been set. So that would always be my leadership direction, that we should have a budget.
And presumably you take, and again, as the accountable officer, Catherine Ettry, I'll turn this towards you. Do you agree with Tiffany Ritchie's point that it's a fundamental part of the Scottish Public Finance Manual that a public sector organisation sets a budget?
Without any doubt, absolutely, I agree.
Right, OK, thank you very much. I'm going to move things along now, and I'm going to invite Joe Fitzpatrick to put some questions to you.
Thanks very much, Convener. The Convener mentioned that we obviously took evidence from the previous incumbents, and particularly the Graham Watson, the former chair of UHI Perth. As part of that, he talked about the risks of top slicing, and that's the area I want to talk about. To paraphrase him, he said that if the top slice had not been at the level that it was, we would not have had a £2 million deficit. We would have been and we would not have been in a crisis management situation. So that's obviously quite a stark thing to say, that the model of funding that UHI has, he's suggesting had a real serious implication. And we heard that many people have agreed that the funding model is no longer fit for purpose. Education, Children and Young People Committee received a letter from UHI indicating that the top slice model, agreeing that the top slice model was no longer fit for purpose, and that they were proposing a full business case for a new operating model to the Scottish Funding Council in December of last year. So really probably a question for Tiffany. Have you received that model, and if so, have you managed to form a view on it?
Yeah, thank you. And I think we're in agreement even I was going to say that we ourselves recognise that the funding model, even the SFC's own funding model, needs to adapt and adjust to the changing environment. And it's absolutely right that UHI itself is also considering its own funding model, including the top slice. We work very closely with Ms Nair and Mr Baxter from the Regional Strategic Body on the work they've been doing, extensive work they've been doing around the target operating model, and Ms Bracefield will be able to provide more detail. From a financial perspective, we have received some initial documentation around this, and we will be reviewing that through January and working closely with the Regional Strategic Body to provide some views. But apologies, we have received it very recently.
Thank you. So, yeah, we received the draft full business case before Christmas, and we're working through that at the moment, and we're not in a position to share our views on that at this time. Apologies. In terms of the top slice, I think it's important to understand, notwithstanding UHI's own comments that they want to review how that works, what the top slice is used for. So we hear quite a lot that it is for the head office. It's important to understand that, and Ms Nairn will correct me if I misspeak here, but my understanding is that it covers the higher education provision across the colleges. It is for effectively shared services that all the colleges can draw down, and many draw these down, and there are some colleges that use it entirely for those services. And it includes things like the quality of the higher education provision, there's IT services provision, there's student services, all of those are provided. So were it to be the case that you removed the top slice and it wasn't paid to UHI at all, and the colleges kept that money, they would then have to provide those services themselves, and at the moment they don't incur those costs because they're provided through that mechanism. So I'm not saying that it is not appropriate to look at it and there's potential for reform, but it's not just that money goes into the central UHI pot and is not then seen by the colleges again, and I think that's quite important to understand.
I guess once you've had time to look through it, the committee would, I'm sure, be pleased to kind of hear your views on how it's working. It's obviously really important, and I think we heard not just to Perth College but to other colleges across UHI. I wonder if I can go to Vicky or Mike, or whoever feels most appropriate to comment, just to give us a bit more of what the new model would mean. There's certainly concern being flagged, particularly, but not only by the EIS, that the model potentially removes scrutiny from the remit of the Auditor General and this Parliament. And I guess, EIS FILA basically have said that they think they would end public service incorporation. So I guess some assurance that that's not the intention of the proposals, and a bit more, what is it you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it, and obviously being mindful of the comments that Jackie Brasted said there about how you fund these services.
Thank you. Happy to come in on that point. And I put a request in to speak on this point, so that will take care of that request. I think it's true to say I don't necessarily agree with the evidence provided by Mr Watson at the previous session. I think that UHI has a number of legacy funding mechanisms that we have all inherited, that they go across the university partnership, which includes a number of colleges, the university itself, and part of that is about the legacy funding model. I think in terms of UHI Perth, they were subject to a number of pressures which I think have been articulated in previous committees, which were additional costs, and some of those were outside of their control. So unfunded pay awards, capital expenditure on buildings, increasing energy costs, as Ms Estrie has said. The top slice, as Ms Braisted has said, it actually pays for a range of university services. And in a traditional university, what you would have is a university services charge or a central services charge that generally sits between 30 and 50%. There aren't any ready benchmarks for those figures. We're actually doing some work at the moment to define those. But certainly what has happened in the past is that actually each of the different parts of UHI has grown over time, and I believe there's significant duplication. So what we are doing collectively as a partnership, and this was very much encouraged by the previous minister, Mr Day, is to look at how the partnership as an entity, or all 11 academic partners, can start to change. That process started with the development of our 2030 strategy, which was launched and agreed by the partnership in 2023, summer 2023. And that then allowed us to take forward an outline business case which looked at ways the partnership could change. That was completed in January of last year. And as has already been said, we've just completed a full business case which was delivered just before Christmas. That is a draft document that we'll be meeting with boards of management to review. And I think quite rightly, as you mentioned, a number of trade unions have expressed concern that actually that might have implications in terms of public-private sector terms and conditions, pensions. That's been well articulated by trade unions, and we're very mindful and cognizant of those concerns, and we're engaging. And what the final solution of UHI moving forward looks like will need to be co-created by the partnership, and we're intending to do that through the vehicle of the full business case. And as has already been said, that was delivered to the SFC and academic partner boards of management just before Christmas on the 19th. So we are in a change process. But I think in terms of the evidence you were previously provided with, I think what you have now seen from the new leadership team in UHI Perth, led by Mr Wiley and Ms Ettry, and the board, is that they have put together a recovery budget, and actually that's within the current circumstances as well. So I would certainly pay tribute to the work that they have done, and will continue to work with them. But I can see Mr Baxter wants to come in as well on that point.
Yeah, thanks, and thank you, Convener, for the opportunity. I think just to build on what's already been said by other participants, UHI is now in a unique position in the sense that we are the last regional strategic body, and as a tertiary partnership, our funding model is quite different to other institutions in the sense that we have further education and higher education, and separate funding streams that come through. There is no separate funding stream to recognise the role that UHI has as the regional strategic body. I think the points that have been made thus far are part of a broader, or I would akin them to a broader public sector reform agenda, where the sharing of services and particularly back office functions is something that's being pursued not just within UHI or within the further and higher education sector, but more broadly, with the aim of one, making best use of the resource that's available to the institution, but also that as much of the funding as possible can be directed towards student-facing services. The full business case, that the draft that's being developed, is subject to consultation with staff, trade unions and our academic partners, and will be subject to review and modification as we move through that process, and that consultation will be a meaningful process. So it is still work in progress, but a direction of travel, I think, has been highlighted by other colleagues. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks very much to both. Obviously, shared service is something that we are encouraging right across public service in order to better use public funds, to make sure it's focused at the chalk face, to coin a pun. But I think it's really important that we have the clarity that the accountability and transparency will continue through any new system. So I think that's something I would encourage you to be continuing to have that discussion with, particularly with your trade unions, who will, I know, be articulating that point. But as a politician, I think we are really keen to be able to have the transparency so that the public funds remain accountable to this place and the Auditor General. I guess finally, just to turn to Perth College, maybe Lynn, is obviously we've had a different view of what the TOPS licence for. When Graham spoke to us, Graham Watson spoke to us, it was almost like this was a huge sum of money that was just paid and disappeared, and we got nothing back for it. But we've now heard that, well, actually maybe it's part of our shared services. Is the new model going to work better, do you think? Have you got a bit of confidence that the engagement that you're having as Perth College is going to get you to a point that works for Perth College as well as UHI? Catherine, sorry.
I think there's no doubt that not only is it UHI Perth, but all of the partner colleges across UHI have been working very closely with the university in the transformation project. And one of the elements, as colleagues have outlined, is the development of a new model. It's been clear for a number of years that the current model is out of date. It doesn't work. It doesn't serve us well. So we're hopeful that the new model will be something that we'll all feel that is much fairer. I would also pick up on one of the points that Mike Baxter made, and I would strongly support the point that we need to ensure that a greater proportion of the funding goes to the student experience.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks, Kavira.
I think Alistair Wiley also wanted to come in on this point, and I think you might have wanted to come in on an earlier point, Alistair. So over to you. The floor's yours.
Oh, thank you, Convener. Yeah, just to go back to the point on the budget, just very briefly. I think a recognition that a budget should have been set, but just to the point that you spoke with regard to further submissions to the committee, I think there was also a huge challenge over that period of time before I came in as interim chair in terms of being able to get the right amount and the right quality of financial information to the board. And that was a consistent theme over a period of time. So, that kind of just, perhaps adds to the picture of the challenges. And I have to say that is something that has been tackled head on since April. And we've been working very closely with Lynn and the finance team to make sure that has been suitably addressed. Just very briefly as well, just on the top slice issue, I would support everything that's been said so far with regard to that. I think there's been a long recognition that the operating model is not fit for purpose. But just to the point that was made about Mr. Watson's submission, I think it's perhaps somewhat naive to say that, if we didn't have the top slice, we wouldn't have been in trouble in Perth. I don't think I necessarily agree with that. And certainly the attitude that I took towards that when I took over in April as interim chair and subsequently started working with Catherine and the rest of the leadership team was that we need to look to, the cost, if you like, that we know that are fixed. These are things that we cannot change, and therefore we need to put our focus on the matters that we can control. And I think what you can now see is that just in the 7 months that Catherine's been in charge at the college, we have turned things around. As Catherine said in her opening statement, we are now looking at recording a surplus for the first time since 2022. So, I would very strongly rail against any suggestion that it was not possible to turn things around. I think at that point in time, there was just an inability of the previous leadership team to be able to come up with different solutions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And again, in the evidence that we've taken, it's been recognised that this is not just a short-term issue. There was a long-term legacy of inadequate internal audit, inadequate resource in the finance department, and of course, as we mentioned in the session before Christmas, I think there were 5 directors of finance in a very short period of time, which suggests something is not quite right. I see Mike Baxter nodding his head. I'm going to move us on because I know Colin Beattie's got some questions to put to you. Colin, over to you.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to look at one or two aspects of governance, some of which have already been touched on, but for my own clarification, I'd like to just be sure. My understanding is, and this is probably a question for Vicky Nairn and Mike Baxter, my understanding is that all communications on financial matters, budgets and so on, get funnelled through UHI. Would that be correct?
I'm happy to answer that. Thank you. So UHI acts as the interface with the Funding Council. The Board of Management of a college board have the responsibility and accountability of setting a budget, and indeed monitoring and ensuring appropriate financial controls is actually in the terms and conditions of appointment for a college chair. We work very much with the colleges and review their financial returns, and then we submit them to the Funding Council. So for 2023, on the 30th of June, we received an FFR submitted by UHI Perth to ourselves as the RSB, and that obviously came with supporting information from the principal, and we then forward that on to the SFC. And the assumption is that there is appropriate financial control that sits behind that is the responsibility of the Board of Management led by the chair. We also have a statement of annual assurance from each of our colleges, and in this case that was received from UHI Perth on the 12th of April, and at that point there were no adverse events notified. Now, where we get into what I have to say is a very unusual situation that we have that we're discussing today, then the RSB and I, as well as my Vice-Chancellor role, I'm also the Chief Officer of the RSB, will look to put in place enhanced monitoring and controls, and that started to develop through 2024 and into 2025. I have to say those are quite exceptional measures because the accountability and responsibility for college financial management sits with the Board of Management. I can see my colleague Mike Baxter wants to come in on that point as well.
Apologies, sir, I was just trying to unmute. So what's been described as the formal relationship, which exists, and that's correct. What I would add, though, is that that does not preclude discussions involving UHI Perth or any of the academic partners within UHI, the RSB and SFC together. So it's not that there isn't joint discussions, and as you know, the issues that are in front of the committee today, there have been a number of discussions and meetings that have involved a tripartite approach. So it's not as simple as saying that RSB is a postbox for communication between the college and the SFC. So where it makes sense to do so, then that engagement takes place.
Would it be true to say that there is some responsibility for monitoring on the part of UHI?
I'm happy to come back on that, convener, and the answer to that is absolutely yes. So in terms of the returns that are provided both annually and in terms of interim management accounting information that's provided and cash flow information, that's reviewed by UHI as well as by the SFC. From a governance point of view, I would also highlight that the financial positions of all academic partners are routinely reported to the Finance and General Purposes Committee and Court at UHI in terms of position, emerging issues, engagement with the SFC and broader kind of strategic funding issues relating to the partnership.
I guess where I am at the moment is I'm looking to see where the point came where UHI became aware of the problem in creating a budget for 23-24 and what was done about it.
I'm happy to respond to that, and Vicky may wish to add to it. I think that the importance of the annual financial returns is not unimportant in this, and I note from the minutes of the October 24 Perth board meeting where some statements were made about the validity or usefulness of the FFR data was questioned by the previous chair. That information is effectively, and there's a declaration that goes with the form, which is not unimportant, which effectively says that this represents the financial plan of the institution that has been reviewed by the board of management. So from that point of view, a degree of assurance is provided by the accountable officer, the principal of the college at that time, that that financial plan had been agreed by the board of management, and that's the same situation as pertains to all of our academic partners. When we became aware of the issues, and they appeared quite late in the day because of the delays in the audit process for 23-24, then obviously we followed up with the college. But in the course of 23-24, financial returns were provided by the college into UHI and then to SFC. So the fact that there hadn't been a formally agreed budget, the fact that the FFR had been submitted and signed off by the principal of the college appropriately, then the assumption was that there had been an approved budget, and that would be the situation generally for academic partners.
As a result of what we've seen now happened in 23-24 over the budget, have you modified your monitoring processes at all?
Again, I'm happy to come back, convener. So again, I joined UHI in May 2024, and previous to that, there was an internal audit review undertaken at a UHI level for the RSB, our university, that focused on the financial oversight of our academic partners, and a number of recommendations were made at that time, particularly around any advances that were made to academic partners and the reporting to Finance and General Purposes and Court, and all of those actions have been addressed in the intervening period. So our monitoring has definitely stepped up in terms of standard templates for academic partners to complete on a regular basis and reporting into committee and court. That has certainly strengthened in the last 18 months or so.
Do you consider that you have sufficient monitoring over the simple fact of some sort of deadline to produce a budget, And is there some system now that would flag that if that deadline was breached?
In terms of the budget, I think again that is something that we would absolutely review. I think in terms of the annual process of the annual business cycle, if you like, in terms of financial returns and budget setting, that's well established, across the sector, not just within UHI. So there are certain points of the year that information will be sought from academic partners around their forecast position, their forecast for the next 3 years actually, and that there are discussions within we have a UHI finance directors group to look at assumptions that should be made within financial forecasts, so to get a consistent picture. The other thing that I would add, and I'm sorry to digress slightly, but one of the things that I would highlight around the FFR returns is it's not simply about filling a form in. The guidance on the FFR that's provided by the Scottish Funding Council is quite clear that whilst there are core assumptions that the SFC will set, that alternative modelling by individual colleges is where that's appropriate should be done, and that there should be sufficient narrative where there is a deviation from those assumptions in financial plans to understand what the implications of those are. And fundamentally, it's about the plan that supports the delivery of what's in the budget over the forthcoming year, and implications for future years as well. So, yeah, in terms of has a budget been set, then that's something absolutely we follow up with. We follow up with individual academic partners, but the assurances that we get through the forecast finance returns are not unimportant in this.
Just to come back on a point you made before, you said you didn't become aware of the lack of a budget for Perth immediately. You first of all received notification from somewhere, probably from Perth, but I don't know, saying there have been audit delays. Yes,
there have been issues for the last couple of years in terms of the timing of completion of accounts and the audit process for UHI Perth and a number of academic partners.
So it wasn't unexpected that there was a delay?
The extent of the delay, I think, was unexpected, and that's something that colleagues at UHI Perth and indeed Deloitte have been working to address for the 24-25 audit. The accounts for which I think are due to go to the UHI Perth board and this month for approval.
Thank you. And maybe something for Catherine and Lynn. Mention was made, the Auditor General talked about the budget process having started and information being gathered, but previous witnesses have said that they don't know what happened to that. They don't know where that information that was gathered went. So the preparatory work that started on the budget just seems to have vanished. Has anything come up about that?
I'll answer that. Because I wasn't there at the time, I had to try and look back and see what could have happened, and spoke with colleagues in order to provide information to Audit Scotland in terms of writing the Section 22 report. And it looked as if, and colleagues had sent emails saying that, well, it looked like we were getting asked for information. There were budget templates that were sent out. So that was information that I got from colleagues.
And the information presumably went nowhere?
I can't account for it. I'm not trying to pass over, but I wasn't there at the time, so I can only go by what was written and speaking with colleagues.
And again, in the Auditor General's report, he talks about the absence of the budget, but also, and importantly, regular reporting to the college management and the board on in-year forecasts and so on against that budget. Is the process now in place to adequately inform the board?
Yes, yes. if I could just give a bit of an outline of the improvements that are in place. In the 25-26 budget process in particular, the finance team worked very closely with budget holders to gather information and to give as accurate an account of income and expenditure as we could gather. So it was a much more robust and inclusive process. It was planned over a period of time. So we did have a standstill budget because we knew that we had to prepare a financial recovery plan by August. So by the end of June, we had a standstill budget that was approved by the board for 25-26 and plans for the following 2 years. Then a financial recovery plan was approved by the board on the 27th of August, and we had comments from UHI, the RSB, and from the SFC. We're now more in a pattern of financial forecasts and providing regular financial information. There are improvements that have been made. There are improvements that have still to be made. When you're in a situation like that, it's not just a quick fix, but the important thing is that we know what we need to improve, and we're working towards that. And also because there's now more corporate memory, because we have a finance team that most of the members now have been in place for over a year, because we've had actuals against the budget, that has helped provide us with information. We meet regularly with the RSB on finance, and throughout the whole period, really, we have done. We've met regularly, so we have a very open and transparent relationship with them. So yes, there are a lot of things that have improved, but as I say, always more to be done in terms of continuous improvement.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
OK, thank you. Before we leave this area, I want to go back to Vicky Nairn, because you may have seen that in the submission which we received from the EIS feeler section dated the 15th of December, and it goes back to this point about what was UHI doing at this point in the history of UHI Perth College, where budgets weren't being set and things were being allowed to drift, and there were these splits in the board about whether a budget should be set or not. The EIS feeler submission talks of inaction and lack of action of UHI Court Regional Strategic Body. And Vicky Nairn, they name you in the letter. How do you respond to that?
Thank you. And we were, just to confirm, that the University Secretary at the time, Sheena Stewart, did receive a copy of that letter, but I understood it was agreed that Mr Watson would respond to that letter, which he did on the 12th of June. I think I would certainly wish to offer an alternative view to some of those assertions. I think, and it's noted in the Auditor General's report under paragraph 30, that we did engage with UHI Perth and to ask for sight of their financial recovery plan in May 2024. At that point, and as Lynn has said, we're having ongoing conversations, but it started to become quite clear that the level of activity that was taking place in Perth College that have been reflected in the FFRs and their annual assurance statement was actually proving quite challenging, especially around some of the workforce changes that they wanted to make. And our role was really to support and monitor at that point. Later on in 2024 and into 2025, it became very clear that actually we needed to take a more direct approach. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that is quite extraordinary because the responsibility for financial management rests with the College Board of Management, but we did step in. That really started with the correspondence which Mr Watson shared with the committee, the letter of the 20th of December, which was acknowledged on the 6th of January and responded to on the 21st of January. And throughout this time, we have been trying to engage with the chair and UHI Perth in order to understand how best to support them, we offered to broker a conversation about setting a deficit budget. And understandably, the chair, I'm not sure if it was the full board's view, but the chair was keen that they deliver a break-even budget. But because of the financial savings that were required, that was quite a Herculean task. So again, there were discussions throughout this period until they did set a deficit budget that actually, how could the RSB help and support? And we do that as a matter of routine course. You know, I would have informal catch-ups with Dr. Cook. I do with most of the academic partner principals because we're working together every day. But I don't think I was quite aware of some of the turbulence that was happening within the board and some of the consternation that Mr. Wiley has referred to. That only became apparent a little later.
But I suppose my question is, shouldn't you have been? And didn't you have somebody from UHI's court or a kind of central figure from UHI who was in attendance at meetings of the Board of Management of Perth College? I mean, wouldn't that be the channel through which those communications would be made and that awareness would have been raised about the budget situation, but also the lack of a budget?
So UHI has an observer on a number of college boards of management. In the case of UHI Perth, it was the chair of court, Mr. Alistair McCall. That is very much an informal arrangement. He was there for some of the meetings and some of the discussions, and that was very much authorised by the chair, Mr. Watson. And I wasn't obviously present at those meetings. But observers in general don't participate in decisions and influence discussions or assume governance responsibilities. And in some cases, Mr. McCall was excluded from some of those discussions if they were reserved business, so he wasn't party for all of them. And later in 2024 and 2025, we started to express concerns about the transparency of that arrangement. And about the attendance of a UHI observer in those meetings.
Oh, okay, I'm a little bit confused because I would have thought an observer from the court of UHI going along to a board of management of the college would have had some kind of role in communicating and challenging some of the decisions that were being made, especially because where we've ended up is that you're appearing before the Public Audit Committee of the Scottish Parliament. There's been a Section 22 report by Audit Scotland. We've heard from Tiffany Ritchie that this is almost an unprecedented situation. Why was that allowed to happen, I suppose, is the question. I think Mike Baxter wants to come in, so I'll bring Mike in and then I'll ask Graham Simpson to put his questions to you.
I don't believe so, sorry, Convener. I think Alistair Wiley was...
Oh, sorry, my apologies, Alistair Wiley wished to come in.
Thank you, Convener. I suppose just to build on the picture that's been painted there, just to say that the concerns of various board members were such that by the 4th of April 2025, we did write to UHI via the chair of UHI Court to outline our concerns. So I say myself and 7 other board members at that point in time.
Okay, thanks. That's useful. We are going to have to move things on, and so I am now going to invite Graham Simpson to put his questions to you. Graham.
Thanks, Convener. As I often do, I pick up on your line of questioning because I think there's something hanging in the air here about the role of this observer and what he was or wasn't doing, or what he was or wasn't being allowed to see or be told. I'm probably as confused as you are, Convener. I just wonder if we can clear this up. Was the observer aware of the issues at Perth College or not?
Well, I can't speak for Mr. McCall, obviously, but certainly, generally, the role of observers is to be a sort of a strategic link between the university and the RSB and the Perth College Board. The responsibility for financial management really rests with the board. Now, I know Mr. McCall went to some meetings. I don't have a record of which meetings he went to, but he wouldn't have been there to monitor the financial performance. He would have been there to talk about areas of joint mutual interest, such as transformation or recruitment or that sort of thing. I don't know if Mr. Wiley might have more information on that point, because he would have been a member of the board. But certainly, as Mr. Wiley has said, there was correspondence from Perth board members on the 4th of April, which was expressing concern about the governance process in terms of what information was shared and what wasn't shared.
Yeah, I'm just what I want to know is, did Mr. McCall at any point flag to you or to UHI that there were problems at Perth College?
I think he and I'll recollect, but he would have flagged, and we would have then taken action that actually we needed to see copies of the financial recovery plan, and we did that through everyday business as well, as Mr. Baxter has said, in terms of meeting with the finance directors. But he was not there in an assurance role. He was there in a sort of coordination, strategic working together role. And generally the operational elements of budget setting would be undertaken by the Board of Management, led by the Chair. We then did step in, and the Auditor General's report does refer to the actions that we've taken, and we then stepped in more formally towards the end of 2024 and into 2025 with enhanced monitoring.
So he did flag that there were problems?
My understanding, yes, but not specifically about budget, but also, you know, it wasn't his job to provide assurance in those meetings. It was really to provide a strategic link and discuss the transformation programme.
I understand that, but he was there as an observer on your behalf. So you would expect that if things come up and he hears them during meetings, that he's going to come back and say, I think you need to know this.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that reflects the action that we started to take. Okay,
I'm going to ask about something else now. Apologies if I didn't pick this up properly, but there was mention, Catherine, you mentioned that there's a new model, a new sort of operating model. So apologies if I didn't quite get what that was, but are you able to share or explain what the new model is?
Well, that's been worked on with the university as part of the transformation project, and that is included in the full business case, which was compiled just before Christmas. So I'm not exactly aware of what it looks like yet.
Who's responsible for it then?
That's UHI.
UHI
has been working with the partner colleges to develop.
Okay.
And obviously the finance directors, it's been a collective effort to look at how we can improve the current model in terms of the top slicing.
So can somebody from UHI then just say in basic terms what the differences would be, the new model as opposed to the old model?
Happy to come in. I raised my hand on just your earlier point, just in terms of the engagement and issues being made aware. If I could maybe just touch on that first before I come to the operating model. Whilst the board, the attendance at the board of an observer is one mechanism, there was ongoing engagement between myself and the finance team and Lynn Murray and her team in Perth. We were meeting through the period in question in 24-25 from June, probably every week or every 2 weeks as things were developing. So the intelligence or the information that I was getting from those meetings was then fed back through to Vicky as the Principal and Vice Chancellor, and then included in reports into Finance and General Purposes and Court, as well as engagement with the Scottish Funding Council around the financial position. and the issues that were highlighted in the section 22 around the moving picture in 24-25. So that the observer at the board is but one route of that engagement and feeding back. On the operating model, at the moment we have effectively a kind of federal partnership model. So funding comes in from the Scottish Funding Council through the regional strategic bodies and is distributed to each of the academic partners for delivery within their own organisations, and they are currently independent organisations with their own responsibilities and accountabilities. The proposal that's being looked at is around a more integrated tertiary institution and how that can be brought together to reduce duplication, improve collective planning and delivery, and that is structural, but it's also cultural in terms of how we work together over a period of time, and it is a longer term programme. So the full business case, which is in draft at this point, will set out that proposal in more detail, and I'm sure it can be shared and will be shared in due course.
Well, I get the business case is in a draft form and you don't want to share the details, but perhaps you could just elaborate a little bit on what the change is. So the money comes in from the Scottish Funding Council, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
To yourself?
To the regional strategic body, and the regional strategic body is responsible for the distribution of those funds to the academic partners for both further and higher education. The operating model currently is that those institutions work independently. They are their own designated body with their own responsibilities and own management structures and functions. There are some shared functions, as was touched on earlier, around the top slice mechanism, but the proposal is about how do we bring these institutions closer together organisationally to reduce duplication and streamline how services are provided. So part of that is structural, but I should also say that's not about centralisation, because part of the raison d'etre for UHI is about making sure that we maintain and support our communities, many of which are rural and remote, including islands communities. So the importance of maintaining provision in those communities, as well as maintaining employment in those communities for highly skilled and well-paid jobs, is part of the mix here. So it's not about a centralisation of the institution. But as I say, the detail of that will be worked through with further engagement with our academic partners and other stakeholders, including staff and trade unions.
And when are we going to see that in detail?
So the current proposal is that the draft will be further developed up to the period up to May, June, and then submitted into the SFC and Scottish Government at that point. And that's subject, obviously, to how the engagement takes place with our stakeholders and partner boards.
But when will it become public?
I can't answer that off. I don't know if Vicky would want to come in there, but I think
yes, I can. Thank you. So we'll be engaging with boards of management in the next couple of weeks. Subject to those discussions and any revisions that come out of it, we're currently intending to go forward for public consultation in March, which is when the document does become public and available to anybody who would like to read on it and comment. That's the current plan. However, as we've said, that this is a draft document for discussion, so that timeline may be subject to change depending on the feedback we get from academic partner boards of management.
Okay, thank you. We'll look out for that. Catherine, I just want to ask you about the very helpful letter that you sent to the committee, yourself and Alistair Wiley. I won't go over it all, but you set out the background, which we've talked about already. The problems in the finance team are covered quite extensively in the letter, but we've spoken about all that already. And then you mention the financial recovery plan that you've got, you suggest that you could hit break even, but actually you said earlier that you think the college could be in a surplus position, which is far more encouraging. So how do you think you've, I mean, how have you turned things around? I should say also, I did notice that you had taken early retirement. You've come out of retirement to save this organisation that you've worked in for 35 years. So, yeah, I mean, what changes have been made? What changes have you made, and what changes do you see going forward to turn things round?
So I haven't done it. The college as a whole, and the college has been extremely supportive of myself, including the senior leadership team, but right across from our student representatives to our academic and professional services staff. Have absolutely put their full effort into this project. So to speak initially about how we went about making changes, we implemented a 9-stage plan that started off with us speaking to staff and actually gathering what staff's opinions were. Asking them about how they saw the future and where they thought we could make savings and where there were opportunities for generating more income. So one of the first things that we did was that we reset the target, in particular for our higher education recruitment. And I asked the staff if they would try to recruit an additional 50 students, and that would draw down about £300,000 in additional funding. So we're on target to do that, and in actual fact we're probably on target to draw down at least another 60 full-time HE students. We've made substantial savings in terms of expenditure. One of the first things that I did was that I implemented an emergency savings exercise. No purchase orders were leaving the college unless I had approved them. And I think in some respects that changed the attitude towards spending, and people began to realise that absolutely every single penny counted, and think that we were watching exactly, very carefully how we were spending money and making sure that the students were benefiting in terms of their experience. That was absolutely protected in terms of spending. There is no doubt that it's a very large and it's a very old estate, and it's a very expensive estate to run. So everybody is looking at making sure the simple things like turning out the lights. Our electricity bill is £600,000 per year. Machines are left on every evening, lights are left on, so everybody is giving that their focus. And these simple things have really worked, and it's also helped to pull everyone together and make sure we're all heading in exactly the same direction. I think moving forward, one of the things it's important for the senior leadership team to do is to ensure that there's transparency, that the staff really understand what it is that we're doing and why it's really important that we have to do that. We have to have a clear focus. We want to move forward. We want to be ambitious. In the past, there was a strategy of becoming a smaller college and doing less. That didn't serve our community well at all. It didn't serve our employers and our stakeholders well. The strategy now is to move forward, be ambitious, and make sure that we're meeting the needs of our stakeholders in our community. We're working really closely with our local authority. We've re-engaged with all our third sector employers, and we're trying to make sure that we're meeting the needs as best we can. It's about restoring confidence. It's about not just restoring confidence in terms of our stakeholders, but it's about ensuring that our students recognise that this is actually a really great place to study, and they get an absolutely first-class service from the staff right across the board. And I think our the National Student Satisfaction Survey shows that year after year, and this year it's now sitting at 88%, and that's about 7% above the sector norm.
Okay. Have you? I mean, I noticed in one of the many documents that we received as a committee ahead of this session, there was mention of courses being cut at the college. That's not unusual. I mean, all colleges are in that position. Do you think you're able to reintroduce some courses?
Well, what we do is we do a curriculum review, and we're just about to start that process again, so it will be a full curriculum review that we will do this year. But what we will give focus is where the skills gaps are and what our employers are telling us that they need. And so one of the things that's important to consider is that as part of the University of the Highlands and Islands, it gives us the ability to deliver degrees and approve different types of qualifications. So one of the things that we have done as part of the University of the Highlands and Islands is that we've challenged this hierarchy between further education and higher education. We are one and the same thing. There's parity of esteem in our institution between vocational qualifications and, for example, degrees. They're seen as valuable. They're all seen as valuable. Vocational qualifications are as valuable in terms of gaining gainful employment as university degrees are. So it's not something that we do in isolation. We include our not only our stakeholders in terms of employers, but our student representatives will engage in that process as well. So it's not necessarily about re-establishing qualifications that were potentially removed, but it's about making sure that we're meeting the requirements in terms of skills development that we know is required for not only for our region, but also nationally and in our case internationally as well.
And you said earlier that you've managed to attract 60 extra full-time students.
The forecast is that when we recruit in at the end of January for semester 2, so at the beginning of February, that we will have recruited an additional 60 HE full FTEs.
And how have you done that?
The staff have done that. So one of the things that we've been really conscious about is to turn around the reputation that we have built up over, unfortunately, the last couple of years. We've not had good press in terms of our local. It's been very negative. So staff have actually identified as many good stories as they can, and our marketing team has worked very hard with our social media and our local newspapers to try and boost our reputation. And then we've had many open days. Our staff go out to the schools, careers events. So it's really important to engage with really good news stories. Some of our students have written up profiles and delivered videos. We've tried our best to put that out and ensure that it's very visible. In the past, I always felt Perth College and the really good work that we do was invisible. We're really working to make sure that that's not the case anymore.
Well, I mean, that's good to hear, because all colleges have good stories to tell, and you need to shout about it, despite the challenges facing the sector. And of course, you're very lucky. You're in a beautiful place, Perth. So why wouldn't you want to go to Perth? Yeah. It's a fantastic place. You might be in an old building, but you're in a great part of Scotland, and you're obviously, your staff are clearly committed to turning things round. But if I can just finally ask about the sustainability of the college, because it is it's a serious position that your college is in and other colleges are. We've mentioned that, in fact, Tiffany, I noticed you nodding your head. You're well aware of this at the Scottish Funding Council. So if I can ask you first, Catherine, and we've got a budget coming up next week. What is it that your college requires in order, well, I guess, to survive, to continue, and then build?
I don't think I can say any more than what College of Scotland have already said. They've laid the case out in a very straightforward and realistic manner. We need additional funding. If we're not in receipt of additional funding, then our communities will suffer. Already we are over-delivering on our credits, and we're over-delivering by about 350 credits. If that basically means that we are unable to draw down the funding for those credits. But if we don't over-deliver, then we would have young people leaving school that would not have any opportunities to continue their education or provide them with the skills and education that they need to go into the workforce. So that was a decision that the college made before I went back as interim principal. But it's certainly a decision that I absolutely support. And this year, as I say, we're over-delivering. If we don't do that, that would have an extremely negative impact on our community. So I would absolutely plead that the colleges are treated much more fairly.
So finally from me then, Tiffany, seeing as you nodded, I'm going to ask you, we've got a budget next week. You're not going to reveal what's in that budget. Perhaps you don't even know. I hope you do know by now. But can colleges expect some better news than they've had in recent years?
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. What I would say is I'd like to recognise the significant work by colleges, including Perth College, not just to address their financial pressures, not just to improve the experience for learners, but whilst they're doing all of that, to provide us with the evidence we needed for sustainability reports in September 25, where we set out, and a mirror image in the university sector, we set out that both universities and colleges in a flat cash environment are facing significant risks to keeping the doors open. And I am also like to recognise the efforts by Scottish Government officials and ministers, where we have been in in-depth discussions for months now, very frequently, to try to work out what can be done. The position we've previously discussed at perhaps the Education, Children and Young Persons Committee is it's both stabilisation and transformation, and that stabilisation is what will help a college such as Perth ensure it maintains its key financial controls. So the sort of situation we've seen remains unprecedented, and the sort of transformation that's needed that we've been discussing today to make sure they can continue to deliver for learners' communities now, but also in the future, because the world is changing so quickly, as Mr. Watson was saying, and we have to enable both that stabilisation and that transformation. But beyond that, I don't think I can comment today.
Well, perhaps you've hinted that we can end the years of flat cash settlements.
Graham, I'm not sure that the panel can answer that question. And I'm going to have to move things along and invite the Deputy Convener to put some questions to you.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning to all our guests. Can I start with just some practical questions? When was the last time that UHI Perth either financially broke even or made a surplus?
2022.
Okay, and what did it break even, or what was the surplus?
I can't answer that question, but I can get that information for you.
And since then, it's reported deficit every year, is that correct?
Yes, it has.
Okay. And what's, in your view, without going into revisiting any of the ground we've covered a lot of today already, what's the primary reason for the college's inability to break even?
I think the primary reason is flat cash and lack of funding. There are obviously other reasons that pertain directly to Perth. I would say that the previous management team did work very hard to try and reduce the cost base of the college. We're probably, in some respects, benefiting from that saving now. For example, people that have left through voluntary severance, the savings around that are actually kicking in the current year. So I would say that we're definitely benefiting from that at this particular moment in time.
I'm just struggling with the terminology. In what way is cutting staff a benefit?
No, it's a
financial
saving,
benefit.
A financial saving.
It surely can't be good to the delivery of quality local education in Perth and Kinross, surely.
So there was the opportunity to take voluntary severance. So staff at that particular time applied for voluntary severance, and that was across academic and professional services, and also senior members of staff. I myself left the college at that time.
Okay. And I should add, I'm not criticising you for taking the actions you've had to take. I appreciate these were extraordinarily difficult financial circumstances, so please don't assume any of my questions are in any way loaded. But I'm trying to understand essentially what drove the Auditor General to produce the report that he had to, given the wider financial circumstances that the college was in. So, okay, so how many staff would you say since 2022 was the last time the college made a small surplus or broke even? In order to make ends meet year on year, which is clearly where things have gone awry over the last few years, how many staff have been cut, either academic, professional or at management level, from the college since 2022?
Lynn, have you got that?
There's over 100 have been cut.
Okay. Yeah. Out of how many, roughly?
I think in 2022 there are about 350. I suppose it's separating things. It's not a straightforward answer in terms of there were voluntary severances, but then there have been, over that period, there have been permanentisation, there have been other posts that we've had to fill in order to deliver. But certainly at the time it was reported over 100. But now I have got the figure, if you allow me just to have a look.
Sure. And while you're looking, I'm just trying to get my head around what effect that's had on the volume of teaching that's taken place. And I will come on shortly to looking at courses specifically that have been cut. But I can see why there's been perhaps so much adverse reaction locally and nationally interested in that's caught the eye of not just auditors but the sector more widely. It sounds like if you lose 100 staff, it sounds like you're losing a lot of teaching as well. And again, in what way is that a good thing?
So it would be 100 academic members of staff. It would be across professional services. And when we say 100 members of staff, they may not all be full-time members of staff. Some of them may be part-time. But without a doubt, there definitely is a difference in terms of the amount of stress that staff are under. They are working harder, we're all working harder. In addition to delivering our curriculum and ensuring that the students have an excellent experience, we're having to make changes right across the whole college and ensure that we're managing as best we can to get to a point where we're able to balance the budget. Also working on looking at commercial opportunities as well. And staff were very enthusiastic as the first part of the 9-stage process to look at getting back to a balanced budget. They were very enthusiastic in terms of providing ideas that they thought would help save and improve efficiency. So one of the things that our managers, in particular academic managers, have been doing is looking at providing the curriculum in a more economic way, ensuring that all classes are full, making sure that if there are low recruiting courses, whether or not there's any opportunity to design the curriculum to ensure that it's delivered in a more effective way, so that, for example, they may join two classes together and deliver a single subject, as opposed to deliver the two classes separately and deliver single subjects. So there's been a lot of work done by staff to make sure that we're trying to deliver the curriculum in as an economical way as possible, but ensuring that the student experience doesn't suffer as a result of that.
Moving on from that, when I looked at the financial sustainability project papers that were submitted, albeit they dated to April 24, and I look at the courses that have been cut over that period. There's both the school colleges programme, but also FE and HE courses that were cut. And I guess what I couldn't get my head around is why they were cut. Is it because you couldn't afford the nature of the courses due to the technicality? Was it the cost of the staff? Is this part of the voluntary? So if you lose a member of staff who teaches that course, you obviously lose the course. Or was it simply you were struggling to recruit adequate student numbers to make the courses financially viable? And I look at some of the courses and it surprised me, actually. Horticulture, skills for work, construction, accounting, software, web technologies, environmental sciences, all the growth areas of the Scottish economy are where you're making cuts. It made no sense to me.
So many of those cuts were made as a result of the ceiling on our credit funding for further education. So there was no choice but to cut those courses. And in reference to our schools college partnership, again, those courses are funded through our credit funding, and the credit funding is capped. And so regardless of how many school courses we would want to do, we can't provide them because we don't have the funding through the credit mechanism to be able to do them. Some of those programmes that you mentioned, including, for example, horticulture, is actually continuing now, and we've been able to offer that at an FE level on campus, but we deliver it in a virtual environment and a face-to-face basis through the university, through our partnership with the university. So we deliver that with Argyll College. So we have looked again at our curriculum, but we will again examine the curriculum, do a full curriculum review, and if there are areas that our employers are telling us where there are skills shortages, then that will be part of our planning process between February and April. It's a substantial piece of work, but the whole college pulls together and works on that, and we drill right down to all of the information that our staff gather from engagement with our employers on a regular basis throughout the year. So we have the intelligence, we just have to put it together and analyse it and make a decision about what the curriculum will look like for 26-27.
Thank you. That sounds very positive. Thank you, and very helpful. I read all the board minutes that were supplied to us over the course of particularly the year 2024. And I was a bit surprised by perhaps the tone of what I was reading. I can almost imagine myself in the room with some of those people. It didn't seem like a very happy board in any way, shape or form. I'd like to ask, first of all, what's the current state of play within the board at UHI Perth? Because there seemed to be, in my interpretation of the board members' input, a lot of contrary views and opinions being expressed on pretty much everything, even by the chair. And can I refer you to the minutes of the 23rd of October 2024? And a couple of things struck me. One was the quote from the chair in the minutes that said, and I'll maybe ask for your opinion on this at the moment, the chair noted that the college makes money from FE but loses in HE. However, there is no breakdown of these figures, so it's unclear as to the provenance of how that conclusion was come to. But the question asked by the chair is, if the college is not making money from HE, why are we doing it? And that's my question today.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree with the terminology that we make money. We draw down funding for all our courses. Well, we draw down funding for all our students. And why are we doing it? Because we need we need skills. We need our population educated. We want to serve our communities as best we can. We want to ensure that our young people and our returners are going into work and well-paid employment. I wasn't on the board at that time, and I think it might be helpful to refer to Mr. Wiley.
Yeah, happy to respond to that. So, in relation to the question that you asked Mr Green about. I was an independent board member at that point in time, but I can certainly make reference to what I've done since April, since taking over as interim chair. I think you're right in saying that there was disagreement. There were people who were unhappy on the board. Many of these people have subsequently left. And one of the first things that I did in April was undertake a governance review. There was an internal report produced on that over the course of 3 months. We went through all of the points that needed to be addressed, and they were fully addressed. We've now got full oversight of the budget and much better financial reporting to the board. That was something that had to be tackled as well. Also focused on board development. So we've since April we've recruited. We now have a full complement on the board, which is, I think, the first time in recent years that we actually have the maximum number of people. We looked at the kind of skills across the whole board to make sure. I think now we've got a very cohesive, a very broad range of skills that people are bringing from a lot of different backgrounds to the board. We reconstituted the committees. We have introduced enhanced induction training and additional training for board members as well, targeting specific areas such as financial literacy and strategy development. We have 4 dedicated board development sessions across the year, where we dedicate each of these sessions to specific training or discussion areas that we want to cover. I also put in place a reset on the whole sort of board culture in terms of laying out my expectations about what the board should be doing, how the board should be operating, my expectations about individual board members' contributions to the board, etc. And I think that's worked quite well, and I think we have a much stronger and cohesive team, and maybe Catherine will want to comment on that as well in terms of the interaction with ourselves and the rest of our team. What we also did was we took time out to look at the Gillies report, look at that in detail, and think about the implications for UHI Perth in terms of what was the findings of that report, and I think that was helpful. And we've also encouraged, or certainly I have encouraged, a lot more board visibility, much more engagement with staff, with students. We have, for example, a dedicated chair email account that anyone can email me in confidence, and people do that. And we have much more board visibility on the ground as well. So on a regular basis, we have board members on campus interacting with members of staff, students, etc. So I think there's been a whole sea change since April. And I think that has worked in tandem with everything that Catherine has done, and I'd like to pay tribute to Catherine. I think she's not taken the credit where it's due. Yes, it's been a massive collective effort to try and turn things around, but Catherine has been at the helm and has been instrumental in making sure that happened.
Thank you very much for that, and may I also share those comments. I think there's clearly been a tremendous turnaround in difficult circumstances, and that's evident from your session today and the written submissions that you've given us. I just want to, because this is public audit, I do want to see where we're at with budget setting processes, just briefly, because obviously the Auditor General focused entirely on the year 23-24, but my reading of the papers, I got a sense that there were some recurring issues around setting a budget in 24-25, and those are evident in the minutes from October as well. One board member said that they were not comfortable in passing a budget, that they couldn't, where there wasn't a 3-year cash flow plan. There were lots of discussions around how difficult it's going to be to produce a cash flow plan, knowing that those issues that were there in the previous year were still there in that financial year, and that wasn't long ago. In fact, even in that board meeting, the board did not approve a budget in the end of October. They're midway through the year, and a budget still had not yet been set, even halfway through that year, which I'm sure is something that the auditors will be looking at. Where are we at the moment? Is there a better atmosphere in the board discussions where you feel that you are more comfortable to understand your cash flow to make those projections properly and come to an agreement that budgets will be set promptly and with the best of knowledge that's available to you more quickly, so that this, you know, we don't have another Section 22 report in future.
Yes, I feel absolutely supported by the board, and I feel absolutely supported in terms of the work that Lynn has done with the finance team. I think it's really important at this point to give credit to Lynn. She has worked absolutely tirelessly with the finance team, and actually I'll pass over to Lynn now to answer the financial aspects of that question, if you don't mind, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Convener. We're now more in a regular cycle as it should be. So we prepare for 25-26. In order to submit the financial forecast return in June, we had a budget. It was a standstill budget, based on assumptions that we knew at the time. We revised that when, because of the timing with the FFR direction, we made a revision to that based on, some small changes, and then we had the recovery plan in August. So that's absolutely as it should be. You prepare the budget, that feeds into the FFR, and then you can start to monitor that. Just to be absolutely belts and braces about it, because we were looking for feedback from SFC and from UHI as the RSB. We also, in December, even though the FFR had been approved, we approved it as a budget in December as well. Even though it was maybe a bit of an overplay, but just to be absolutely sure that we were following correct governance.
Okay, that's really helpful. And this is my final question, Convener. Thank you. Is what does the future of UHI Perth look like? There are many colleges that have been explicit with the Parliament and other stakeholders and the government that they could and may hit a financial wall and cease to be going concerns in future. That's not a situation anybody in any of our own local areas want to see in any of our local colleges, and I'm sure the same be true in Perth as well. But given what we've heard today around some of the issues which are outside of your control, the very relationship that you have with UHI, the top slicing model, which has been criticised heavily by many board members over the years, the cap on your FE credits, the flat cash settlement from government, your indirect relationship with Funding Council, and you've pretty much maximised cost savings to the bare bones. That surely must leave you in quite a perilous position financially now. So what does the future actually look like?
There is no doubt that it's a difficult financial outlook given where we are currently, hence the reason why we would ask for a consideration in terms of how our funding is currently being viewed. There are many risks to us, in particular around we don't know what our staff own costs will be. We're in very old deteriorating buildings. The maintenance costs are substantial. Staff morale, staff morale has been very low. There is definitely, people talk about a culture change. You can't change culture overnight. It's a bit like turning the Titanic, but I think it's important that we've started and we will continue. Staff morale has definitely improved. The general feel about the place has absolutely improved as well. I think it's important that we're transparent in what we're trying to do. I think it's really important that we continue to work very closely with our local authority. We've lost ground in the last few years about how we work collaboratively with our partners. We are optimistic, despite the financial cloud that's hanging over all our heads. We are optimistic, and we've got a clear focus on restoring confidence, not only in the college itself, but restoring confidence in our community and in our students and our staff.
Wish you luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And on that more optimistic note, I want to draw this morning's proceedings to a close. Can I begin by thanking those of you who have joined us online? We really appreciate you giving up the time. And for those of you that have had difficulties with the weather, I hope that improves soon for you and that you're properly re-engaged. We want to therefore place on record our thanks to Vicky Nairn, Mike Baxter and Alistair Wiley. Again, we very much appreciate your patience and your time this morning. It's been very useful to us. And can I also turn to the witnesses who have managed to make it into Edinburgh and to thank you all for the evidence that you've given us as a committee. It's very much appreciated. So can I thank Tiffany Ritchie, Jackie Braisted, Catherine Ettree and Lynn Murray for your time and for the information that you've been able to give us this morning, the way in which you've answered a quite wide-ranging set of questions this morning. Again, just to record our thanks to you for that. And I am now going to suspend this morning committee to allow for a changeover of witnesses. Thank you very much.
All right.
Well, good morning. Can I welcome everybody back to the committee? Agenda item 3 this morning for the Public Audit Committee is consideration of the Auditor General's report into the NHS in Scotland 2025 finance and performance. So I'm very pleased to welcome to the committee to give evidence on this report Stephen Boyle, the Auditor General. The Auditor General is joined this morning by Lee Johnson, who is a Senior Manager at Audit Scotland, and by Bernie Milligan, who is an Audit Manager at Audit Scotland. We've got some questions to put to you, but before we get to those questions, Auditor General, could I invite you to make an opening statement?
Many thanks indeed, Convener, and very good morning and Happy New Year to the committee from all of us at Audit Scotland. We're bringing, as you mentioned, Convener, our annual overview of the NHS in Scotland this morning, and the report looks at how the NHS in Scotland performed during 2024-25, both financially and operationally, and we also examine the progress that's been made towards delivering the ambitions for reform of health and social care in Scotland. Health spending remains the single largest area of the Scottish Government's overall spending in Scotland, accounting for around 38% of the Scottish budget. In 24-25, that equated to £20.6 billion. Even with this increased level of spending, the NHS in Scotland, in our view, is not yet in a financially sustainable position. NHS boards struggled to break even, with 7 territorial boards requiring Scottish Government loans. Even allowing for that, Convener, though, it is important that we also note that NHS boards achieved unprecedented levels of savings during 2024-25. Scottish Government has forecast that health spending is projected to continue to grow over the medium term. But with that backdrop, it also means that there will be prioritisation, and that could mean less money for other vital public services. The delivery of efficiencies and reform within the health and social care system will play an important role in both the NHS and Scotland's overall medium-term financial sustainability. But despite more money and indeed more staff, NHS Scotland's performance has not yet improved in line with the commitments made by the Scottish Government, particularly to eradicate long-term waits for treatment. Activity in secondary care increased last year, but it still remains below pre-pandemic levels. Waiting lists and waiting times, though, are starting to fall. Improvements in productivity and reform of health and social care systems are needed if health outcomes are to get better, health inequalities to be reduced, and service delivery to improve. The recent publications during 2025 of an operational improvement plan, a health and social care service renewal framework, and a population health framework are welcome steps forward in setting out the key principles for delivering reform. But indeed, it's fair also to say that some of the ambitions within these documents are long-standing and have yet to be delivered. For example, particularly of note is shifting the balance of care to the community and local services away from secondary services. This persistent implementation gap between policy ambitions and delivery on the ground needs to be addressed if the Scottish Government, together with health and social care leaders, can realise their ambitions and take the opportunity to drive forward the necessary changes in direction this time around. The Scottish Government now needs to set out publicly detailed, measurable actions that will enable change and help everyone understand how a different health service in Scotland will work. As ever, Convener, Lee, Bernie and myself will do our utmost to answer the committee's questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and yes, and a belated Happy New Year to you as well. Can I start off then by looking at progress? Can I look at progress through the lens of your own annual reports, Auditor General? To some extent, this is captured, I think, in Appendix 5 of the report we've got before us today. But when I went back to look at the equivalent report from 2024, you talked in there about, or made recommendations that certain things should happen. And I really just wanted to check with you the extent to which progress on these fronts had been made or not. One of your top recommendations was that there ought to be a capital investment and asset management strategy. Is there one? You talked about the need for a revised medium-term financial framework for health and social care. Has there been one? And you also talked about the importance of lessons to be learned from the negotiations following the contractual end of the Private Finance Initiative public-private partnership contracts, which have been a feature of the NHS long-standing. Could you give us an update on where progress on that front is as well?
Yeah, very happy to, Convener, and I think I suspect I'll do a number of times over the course of the session. I'll turn to colleagues to come in and come up with a bit of detail. Maybe just to, in no particular order if that's helpful, but you mentioned on PFI contracts, I think we know, and we've had discussions with the committee, that many of the early PFI contracts that date from perhaps the early 2000s, we're now beginning to enter into that cycle where PFIs coming to an end, typically of a 25-year term, and returning to the public sector. I know the committee is moving in a different sector. One of the first ones, I think, was Kilmarnock Prison, returned to public ownership. And we know that through the work of the Scottish Futures Trust and some of the specialist services, there is preparation underway. So in an NHS context, that refers to New Craig's Hospital in Inverness will be one of the PFI contracts that will return to the public sector. Larkhall unit in Glasgow is one of the specialist services there. And I'm just trying to recall the third is perhaps Hare Myers Hospital, I think in NHS Lanarkshire, will be one of the other large entities coming back to the public sector over the course of the next few years. I think what we're seeing is, we've given an overall in progress, and I think that's fair to say, Convener, that there probably won't be an end point till PFI until the dates all come to an end. And as I think as the committee has taken evidence on before, there's no single template, or there wasn't a single template for how PFI contracts were structured, or what then happens at the end of the contract either. I think even within an NHS setting, and an NHS leaders themselves can share this detail with the committee, is there's a range of outcomes that could happen. Some could be an extension of the contract, but what matters most, of course, is that the experience and learning is shared. And I think that's the important role that the Futures Trust is undertaking, to provide that detail and information across the system, so that the public purse is being well managed, managing the risks of it, and also that the public sector knows what it's getting from these individual assets, so that they can factor it into their future maintenance and financial projections, as well as service operations too. In terms of the second 2 points, I'll maybe bring Bernie in if she wants to say anything about the capital plans and arrangements. I think what I would say, just first of all, I think is relevant to both the revenue, medium-term financial projections and capital, is the timing of the Scottish budget next week. That will set out much of the intention, coupled with the spending review, as to what the expected revenue and capital plans will be for health and social care services. So just for completeness, Convener, before passing to Bernie, if anyone wants to add, as we set out, we did recommend that a medium-term financial framework be published for health and social care. And whilst that didn't happen, as the committee will know, that the government did publish a medium-term financial framework in June of last year that includes service reform, prevention and wider plans for health and social care system. And as I alluded to in my opening remarks, there have been a range of additional strategies published over the course of 2025. But what we are looking to see, and again, as we set out in today's recommendations, is the detail underpinning that now needs to come through, so that this committee, Parliament generally, public and those working in the health and social care services have a clear understanding of what reform, change, financial sustainability looks like. I've said quite a bit there, Convener, but I will turn to Bernie first of all, if she wants to add.
So as yet there is no capital investment strategy or infrastructure investment plan for the health sector, and as the Auditor General said, we would expect a bit more detail next week with the budget and the spending review. We do know, obviously, there's a number of capital projects that are underway, and we've set them out in the report. But there's also a number of, particularly national treatment centres, that are paused. What has happened in terms of capital is that boards were required to submit business continuity plans in January 2025, and that was really about kind of day-to-day maintenance of the estate. And there's a whole raft of projects that are now being put in place. I understand about 100 million has been allocated across boards. But in terms of that bigger strategic capital investment, what we have heard is that there is now boards have been consulted in terms of their strategic priorities for health infrastructure. So looking at those bigger builds in terms of health facilities, hospitals, etc. And that those strategic assessments would take place in 26-27, and any ministerial decisions in terms of the future estate not until 2027, and the expectation there is that any decisions there would be in line with the ambitions for renewal of the health and care system, as set out in the service renewal framework, and obviously ambitions there around shifting the balance of care to community and so on. So as yet, and possibly a wee bit away from a plan as such.
Yeah, and a plan and a strategy presumably would reflect that shift in resourcing that has been spoken about for a long time, but hasn't necessarily been delivered. Can I, in the interest of time, can I just move us on to another area? And it's something which you said in your opening statement, Auditor General, which is that despite more money going into the National Health Service and despite more staff being employed by the National Health Service, I think you choose as a baseline 2019 and you say additional resources of £3 billion, additional staff members of 20,000 in the workforce. Despite that, you say sustainability in the health service is not improving. Could you explain that for us?
I can, Convener, and the figures that you reference, I think, are really important. So there's been a nearly 25% increase in real terms in total health spending over the past 10 years. We've seen also staff costs increase by 31% since 2018-19. And yet, even allowing for that, and also important to recognise that in the more recent terms, activity is increasing. So, there is more activity happening, particularly in secondary care, where this report primarily looks at. But I think this reference the committee to Exhibit 2 in the report, and I appreciate you've taken evidence from us in some of the weeks towards the end of last year on two of the Section 22 reports that we prepared on NHS Ayrshire and NHS Grampian, where two of the boards are experiencing financial challenge. Exhibit 2 sets out that there are 7 boards in Scotland that required brokerage during the financial year to 24-25. Only one health board in Scotland has ever repaid brokerage, and we're now sitting with around £500 million of outstanding brokerage to health boards. There are new arrangements that the Scottish Government is looking to bring in terms of the support and intervention. But if you look just in terms of some of the detail, and again, I know the committee is familiar with this about the escalation of the support and intervention framework that the Scottish Government has with health boards in Scotland. Just for completeness, one board, NHS Grampian, is at level 4 in terms of its financial sustainability. There are then 8 health boards at level 3 in terms of financial enhanced monitoring and support is the definition of that. And of those 8, I think 5 have financial management or financial sustainability as part of the rationale for why there is enhanced engagement. These are the indicators to me, Convener, that talk about that we're not yet in a financially sustainable model to deliver health and social care in Scotland.
Right, thank you. And other members of the committee are going to get into some of those areas in a bit more depth, so I will avoid stepping on their toes and making myself unpopular. And I will move on to invite Jamie Green, the Deputy Convener, to put some questions to you.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Auditor General and accompanying guests. I will carry on this line of questioning around the state of the finances of NHS boards, particularly. As you've already noted, a number of them have received considerable amounts of brokerage. Now, just for the benefit of the public out there, what exactly is brokerage and how does it work?
Yeah. Effectively, we have a small explainer on page 10 of the report, which defines brokerage. And effectively, it's a form of loan funding. And there is something of a history of this because it's the Scottish Government, the Health Department's intention to move away from brokerage. And we set some of the detail out of that further on in the report. But it's really a loan. It's a loan to support a health board achieving its financial targets, principally to break even each year. And as I mentioned, 7 boards received brokerage during the course of 24-25, and that comes against a backdrop now of a cumulative balance of just over £500 million of brokerage. And the expectation, we understand, of the Scottish Government is that those amounts will still be due to be repaid by health boards to the Scottish Government once they are deemed to be within a stable financial position.
In your professional view, is there any evidence that these boards in future will be able to repay any of these loans? And I point towards Exhibit 6, which forecasts, even for the next 3 financial years, an ongoing remaining deficit within each of those boards. So there doesn't seem to be any evidence that any of these boards will be either breaking even or making a surplus and have any ability to repay that money without finding it from further savings down the line.
You're right. I think it will be about prioritisation. So for boards, whatever expectation is set by them or for them by the Scottish Government about when, if and when brokerage will be repaid. But that is, as we understand, Deputy Convener, is the Scottish Government's position, is that this amount that's outstanding will be repaid by boards once their financial position allows. I think probably what you would typically therefore expect to see as part of boards' forward financial plans, and if as I mentioned in terms of the support and intervention framework, if that is the expectation of the Scottish Government, I would expect they would be working with the boards to plot into future plans when those amounts will be repaid. Clearly that will be a real prioritisation and policy matter. But history suggests that given that the amount of outstanding, say is now £500 million, and that only one board, NHS Tayside, has ever repaid brokerage, is that it will be challenging and it will be a significant departure from the arrangements that we've seen up until now.
Okay, I guess just on a more forensic level, have you seen from any of the audits of these boards any evidence that the repayments feature in their accounting?
So it would be part of their forward financial projections. So as you know, audit is more typically a retrospective. So the detailed analysis that auditors will do is of the transactions that have taken place. But I'll turn to colleagues actually if you've got any kind of further insight into the consideration of plans, but if any insight in that. But I would be, as we do, we're sceptical of that given kind of what's gone before. It'll be important to see evidence of amounts actually being repaid if that remains the government's intention. But if we have information just now, we can share that with you. If not, it's perhaps something we can come back to the committee in writing.
Mr Beattie is going to talk about new arrangements that are replacing brokerage anyway, so I'll maybe just park that issue. But I think what I couldn't quite understand from your report is just the variety of the deficits that the boards are facing. So if you look at the last 4 financial years that your report covers, at the top of that, the worst offender, if you like, seems to be NHS, Ayrshire and Arran, an area I've represented for nearly a decade, and yet it's hard to understand why they've received £130 million of brokerage, yet Fife only 44, less than a third of what that is. So is that because there is a view that these boards are just struggling to make ends meet? Is it that there's higher demand? They have a different demographic to some other NHS boards? Or are there some other fundamental reasons in the way that they are governed or operated?
I think it's a combination of all of those things, okay. To be frank. And probably, I think it's perhaps captured, and I appreciate it to drift into what the new arrangements might be, but I think it is relevant that the Scottish Government have, as we reference in paragraph 31, the position that stated that brokerage has increased sharply in recent years, questions its sustainability, but also the point of equity to health boards across Scotland. If there is a pattern of provision of brokerage to some boards, but not others, a sense of incentives. Is it the case that some boards are making the difficult prioritisation decisions, the savings, and that other boards aren't? Perhaps without delving into individual health boards, if you allow me maybe one comment, I thought it was telling from the evidence that we gave to the committee on Ayrshire and Arran. That was a board that had been at level 3 for 7 years on the support and intervention framework, whereas other boards seem to come onto the support framework and then off it much more quickly. So I think it is a set of arrangements that did need to be reviewed, and you can see from the Scottish Government's intention through its updated arrangements that there is no more provision of brokerage. And the expectation, we understand from the Scottish Government, is that if a board exceeds its support funding cap, it will go into deficit. And that will be a matter for auditors to consider, and indeed for myself in future reporting.
In your statement, you made it clear, and have done in the past, that despite, I guess you could call it record funding, increased funding, depending on how you quantify it over which period of time, but the spending on health by the government is 25% higher in real terms than it was 10 years ago. And one could argue that's a good thing. It means that the government is spending more money on the health service. But in the same breath, you also said the outcomes aren't necessarily matching the extra spend. And I don't know if any analysis has been undertaken as to what is both driving that, but what might need to change. And without delving into policy changes, I understand. But clearly, we talked just there about the disparity in health boards and how some are performing differently, and I'll come on to levels of intervention in a second. But Exhibit 1 to me just paints a very complex picture of how the funding is allocated and spent through the territorial boards and national boards and the very complicated integrated authority structure as well. Is that part of the problem, perhaps?
So I think you can see the NHS and health and social care in Scotland, it is a complex system. It's probably complex by necessity. Some parts will be complexity by design too. It isn't just about health services. It's very clearly connected to social care arrangements, the journey that people will take through life and the touch points that they'll have with public service. And so much of that will be through health and social care models. In Scotland, we have a range of different structures. Some of that we explored through the report we produced on governance earlier in the year, aspects of it captured here, and tomorrow the Accounts Commission and myself will be publishing a report on delayed discharges, alongside how integration authorities in Scotland are performing too. So this is the system that we operate. But I think what it's not yet doing, and it's not yet delivering upon the Scottish Government and COSLA's now stated ambition through some of the strategies that they produced over the course of 2025, to take the steps that they want to reposition Scotland to become healthier, to more preventative-based approaches, to keep people out of hospital for longer. And I think that's consistent with many of the commentary that commentaries that Audit Scotland has been making for many years, to move to a more sustainable model. And I appreciate you, Deputy Convener, or other members might want to explore our views on it. But I think, as I said in my opening remarks, that these aren't necessarily new ambitions. But what we haven't seen up until now is the ability to deliver upon an ambition that moves the dominant spending and provision of treatment out of a secondary care setting and to keeping people healthier for longer outside of hospitals.
On the record in this committee and elsewhere publicly that you believe that there may be areas of healthcare provision that people assume the NHS provide at the moment but may not necessarily offer in future, and that's perhaps we can pick your brains on that some other day. But going back to the finances, I was intrigued to see that you report nearly £700 million of savings in a single year across the NHS, which is a marked increase year on year. Do we have any understanding of how those boards have come about, those savings? Savings to me can be a dangerous word sometimes. What sort of things have been cut, for example? Because we know that staff costs have gone up, so that's not a saving. We know that there have been some salary settlement agreements reached. That's not a saving. And as you say, some waiting times are coming down, so that's obviously required investment. So where are all these savings? What do they look and feel like in the NHS on a day-to-day basis?
I'll start, maybe turn to Bernie actually, come in some of the detail of that, because I think this is significant, the volume of savings that have been made, and the committee, I know, will be familiar for many years. We've kind of drawn the distinction between different types of savings, recurring and non-recurring. And particularly important is therefore to reference that the proportion of recurring savings jumped from 37% in 23-24 to 46% in 24-25. And recurring savings supports the financial position, not just in the year in question, but into the future if these are sustained approaches. So I think that is welcome. We've spoken, I think, in the committee before about some of the innovations that the Scottish Government team have sought to bring in. So the financial delivery unit being one. And again, at Exhibit 4, we reference for the committee's interest a savings approach, a saving grid, how some of these approaches are going to change. Bernie can maybe talk about the detail, but I think one of the most significant we've seen in today's report is the change in costs in agency nursing. For example, so there's some of the detail in that, Deputy Convener, is Exhibit 5, where in 1 year there's been a 31.3% reduction in agency nursing costs. Benefits financially, yes, but also in service provision. So in terms of the continuity. So these are important developments, actually. But again, I've just to note that one, and if Bernie wants to elaborate on that or any others, you're more than welcome to.
Yes, thanks, Auditor General. So yeah, we have found that there has been big progress this year in terms of savings, and in particular in terms of recurring savings. So you've had, a third higher savings than 23-24. And that improvement in recurring savings from 37% to 46%. And it's worth reminding the committee that the savings, they are an efficiency of saving essentially, and that's retained by the board. So it allows them to cope a bit better with some of the other cost pressures that they're under and help achieve that statutory break-even. We've also highlighted, as the Auditor General has said, the activity of the financial delivery unit within the Scottish Government, and that was set up in 2023. And since then, there has been that improvement in recurring savings, not achieving the 3% target as yet, but 2.2% this year, compared with 1.3% in the previous year. And they have put in place a number of supports, so a bit of, basically hands-on support, helping boards deliver better insight, better data, so they can look at how other boards are performing. And the 15-box grid has been one of the key tools. So as part of that, boards have been given access to, there's a Power BI benchmarking tool. So that allows them to compare their performance against any of these different saving opportunities that are set out in Exhibit 4. And it's a way of sharing best practice and so on. So boards will self-assess against each of those different areas. And we have obviously highlighted the improvement, particularly in nurse agency spending, which obviously increased hugely during the pandemic and now has declined, a fall of 70% over the last couple of years. They are doing a bit of a refresh of the 15-box grid, so it hasn't remained the same. So, for example, sustainable prescribing is a new area, so other areas where they've made progress. Before there was medicines of low clinical value, so there's now a list of medicines that boards are being advised they shouldn't really be prescribing because they've limited value, and that has certain savings attached to it. So those are some of the examples, but certainly we can see that in terms of that wider position, in that deficit position, and obviously, Deputy Convener, you've pointed out that there is that, over the 3 years there is still that deficit, but there has been an improvement in the forecast deficit, and so I think it's just over 300 million. So when we reported last year, there was a forecast 3-year deficit of 1.235 million, and this year it's 918 million. So there is a potential for these savings to have an impact on the forecast position and the future position of boards.
That's extremely helpful, thank you. I mean, from a constituent's point of view, they're still sitting on a waiting list and wondering why their health boards are making savings. That's really the crux of my question. And equally, we know that 5 boards are sitting at level 3 intervention, 1 at level 4. Is there any evidence that that's going to improve anytime soon?
So I think it'll be a moving picture for individual boards. Again, I appreciate the committee heard from us and in due course maybe take evidence from the Scottish Government and accountable officers on some of the impact of that intervention. But it's not immaterial, so on NHS Grampian, one of the factors, of course, is that it was accompanied by an external consultancy report by KPMG that sought to dig into some of the detail as to why its financial and service performance was causing challenges. So the impact of that and the other levels of intervention are to be seen. I think what is important, again, apologies for referencing it again, is that support and intervention doesn't become the norm. Like I think it has risked becoming inertia, and Aaron that actually can see tangible impact and benefits from the support and intervention arrangements, rather than it just continues on for many, many years.
Maybe pop back later.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to turn to Colin Beattie, who's got some questions to put to you. Colin.
General, just 1 or 2 questions about the financial support for NHS boards, particularly in relation to the change of support that's being proposed here. In paragraph 31 of your report, you say that brokerage had increased sharply in recent years and that it was unsustainable and that it created an inequity with those boards that were operating within their statutory duty to break even. Now, the Scottish Government, you state, is intending to replace that with the current brokerage with 3 sources of funding: the sustainability funding, deficit support funding and financial support funding. But you also state that there's a lack of clarity and transparency around the introduction of these deficit support funding mechanisms. Can you elaborate on why you reached that conclusion?
Yes, of course, actually. So I'll turn to Bernie, who's also looked at this in detail. You're right that there is a change of plan, and I think for the reasons that we set out in the report and you referred to, Mr Beattie, is that the intention of that is to provide clarity to boards. Clarity not just to boards who've received brokerage, but also across the system. And I think the equity point matters, that, so that for boards who have been experiencing financial problems, but being able to manage those, it gives them certainty around the use of the kind of wider resources. In terms of the clarity and transparency of it, I think our sense was that there was more for the Scottish Government to do to communicate across the system about how these new approaches would operate. Because there are many boards who haven't received brokerage. So there's some who've consistently been able to manage their financial position who won't be familiar with it, whereas there are other boards, as some we've referenced already this morning, who have been part of both the brokerage, the support and intervention system for many years. So I've taken, and again, Bernie can say a bit more about this, but how it will operate. I think what remains to be seen, Mr. Beattie, though, is how will it play out if a board exceeds its cap, that it's not able to deliver financial balance? Will the Scottish Government just say, well, you'll just have to report a deficit, at which point the deficits risk becoming unsustainable and what that might mean for wider financial positions. So this is new territory, and I think it's important there's openness and transparency across the piece and how the new arrangements will be delivered together, not just from the base scenario, but some of the what-if happens thereafter. Bernie.
Yeah. So just to say, I suppose it was the Scottish Government's position that brokerage was coming to an end, and it was their position that that it increased sharply, that it was financially unsustainable, and that it was creating an inequity, and that was set out in later December 24 to boards, and they also warned that for those boards not achieving financial balance, that could show as an overspend on their financial statements and possible modified accounts on the basis of that. There's obviously, we knew that there was sustainability funding that was being put in place, and that was baselined into budgets at the beginning of the year, and that's allocated to all boards on the basis of the NRAC formula. So that was a £250 million pot. Where there is a lack of clarity and transparency is around the deficit support funding, and that was introduced at some point through 25-26. We have seen some communication that was made between Scottish Government's the Financial Delivery Unit, carry out quarterly reviews with boards, financial reviews, and following the Q1 review, which would have been sort of August time, there was then communication around the deficit support funding and a new pyramid of support that they've termed it, in terms of not just the funding but also the kind of other forms of financial advice and support that boards would be provided with. And the deficit support funding would be for those boards who were already on the support and intervention framework. There is detail in terms of the amount of, or the maximum amount of funding that boards can draw down, but the overall pot is £166 million.
Clarify one basic thing. It says here in your report that the Scottish Government advised NHS boards in December 2024 there'd be no brokerage for NHS boards in 25-26, which implies that it's already in place. So for the current financial year that we're in, 25-26, that's the Government's position. And I think, as Bernie mentions, the pyramid of support arrangements that we set out at paragraph 32 is how the system is currently operating. And that's something auditors will be looking at during the annual audit of individual boards, and a topic we'll return to in next year's report as to how it has all ensued. I'm just wondering, because you yourself have said there's a lack of clarity and transparency in this. Do you know whether the NHS boards have been properly briefed on this? Do they understand it? Did you pick up anything about that in your audit? I think what we're picking up, though, is, I think it's maybe alluded to, Mr. Beattie, is that
there'll be some boards that will be really clear on how brokerage works because they've been in that system for many years, but not necessarily all. And that then really the point we make about what happens for those boards that are in recurrent deficit. And this is the essence of the first recommendation we make in our report. How financial balance will be achieved, what role the deficit support funding will have, given that it's capped. So if there are circumstances that occur that cap is breached nationally, is it how financial support through the financial delivery unit, exploring arrangements, how it will interact with the support and intervention framework. That will be happening in live terms right now, as we move into the 3 months before the financial year end. We're certainly going to return to it during next year's report to explore how it has all worked. But I think it's important to get off on the right foot for the Scottish Government and Health Department and for boards to be absolutely clear about what happens under different scenarios.
I have to confess, looking at it, I'm not entirely sure how it is going to work, but no doubt they've got something in mind for it. You mentioned about the inequity, and the Scottish Government said that in part the brokerage system has been replaced due to the inequity with these boards that were operating within their statutory duty to break even. Now, the new system has a deficit support funding component which is not repayable, and it's given to boards that are escalated to the support and intervention framework. Doesn't this risk preserving elements of the inequity from the previous system, given that boards performing well will not have access to this element of the funding?
So I think there is a risk but for the Scottish Government and health boards to manage that. It's not a case that a board, or ought not to be the case in my view, that a board is continually on a support and intervention framework standing, that it's receiving a brokerage as was, or now deficit support funding, but rather through the support that they are receiving, their status on the support and intervention framework is a short-term matter, rather than some of the examples I think we've talked about already today that can go on for many, many years. Ultimately, this will be a call for the Scottish Government to make about that it satisfies itself that the arrangements that it has in place through support and intervention are meaningful, they're making a difference, that it's not just going to be about short-term getting over the line in terms of the financial position or deficit support funding, but making some of the more fundamental changes in terms of efficiencies, service models that make the difference. And I guess ultimately, I think, if just to reference again why the reform ambitions matter so much, that it is the route through from some of the reactions and financial support that goes with it, but instead moving to a more sustainable model of health and social care.
Well, you've already stated you're going to be looking at this in the reality, see how it was applied, and I think we look forward to seeing the results of that, or our successor committee will. Looking at capital spending, we've looked in previous reports about the difficulties in the backlog in repairs and so on. But your report states that capital investments on a downward trend, with a 22% decrease since 2021-22, which is quite a big increase given the fact that we've got this huge deficit. Can you maybe clarify some of the reasons that you understand for the fall in the capital investment? How are the current levels, for example, compared to pre-pandemic? And is that relevant? We keep on referring to pre-pandemic as if it was a wonderful era, but we're in a new reality now, so maybe we should be more cautious about that. Do you foresee that there's any patient safety or service delivery issues, risks with the current levels of capital investment?
Yeah, I'm happy to start on that, and again I'll bring colleagues in who want to say a bit more. I mean, on the reference to pandemic before and after, we do think carefully about the years with which we kind of reference to draw a trend. At some point, of course, we'll stop talking about pre-pandemic in our reporting, but I think it is still really relevant, especially in health and social care context. The disruptive effect that it's had, its legacy is still undoubtedly being felt within Scotland's health and social care system. Clearly, that won't always be the case, and we'll think carefully as we do each time we prepare a report what's the best reference point. In terms of capital, I mean, the trends are clear that there's been a reduction. Two important figures, Mr. Beattie, so 5.35% in the overall Scottish Government capital budget since 21-22, but it's significantly larger within health and social care of 22%. We know, and I know the committee has taken evidence on some of the reasons behind it, some of the constraints in the capital budget that the Scottish Government has been dealing with, notably the ending of the financial transactions budget that has curtailed some of the ambitions that the Scottish Government has had for capital projects. I'll maybe return to the maintenance point in a moment, but in terms of what's that meant for the Scottish Government's capital investment ambitions, we kind of set out paragraph 36 and then Exhibit 7 some of the investment that is taking place, so plans for a new Monklands Hospital, investment in NHS Western Isles at Barra and Battersea Community Campus, and then the planned reprovision of the Princess Alexandra Eye Pavilion in NHS Lothian. Bernie rightly mentioned that there's a wider review of capital projects happening during 2026 that we expect will be part of the prioritisation exercise for what will then be the 27-28 budget and financial plans. We're anticipating next week, I think the Parliament will also, alongside the budget, to see some of the detail of the capital investment pipeline plans as well, that can set out kind of where investment is going to be happening. A couple of final things before passing to colleagues. Exhibit 7, we set out the status with the national treatment centres and how really, because of some of the capital constraints that were experienced after the plans were set out, again during the early stages of the pandemic, that 4 of those planned national treatment centres remain paused in terms of their activity. I'll bring in colleagues if you want to say maybe a wee bit about the backlog maintenance and any of the risks and any other points that you asked about.
To the mix here, the question of PFIs and the maturity of the PFIs. I actually read the PFI contract for ERI. It was quite a thriller. And that and a few others that I skimmed, there are potential commitments to capital payments to terminate the PFI contracts. Different options and quite complex options, some of them. And I don't know, are you aware that the Scottish Government's factored that in? I would think they would somewhere. But is it evident?
I can maybe just take that first of all, actually. So our understanding is, yes, that work is absolutely going on, being led by the Scottish Futures Trust and working across government, including with the NHS, so that, as you rightly say, these were large, complex contracts. And they're not all the same in terms of what obligations or opportunities are conferred upon the public sector at the completion of the contracts. We know that there's expertise, I say, within those organisations to ensure that the public sector is managing both the opportunities and risks of when each various tranches returns to the public sector. And that will increase quite significantly over the next few years. I think our report, as I touched on some earlier remarks about Wishaw General, Hare Myers, New Craigs, Lark Hall, Larkfield Unit have been the next ones. But there are large projects, thinking about some of Scotland's school estate, for example, will be very significant projects that will return to public sector ownership over the next few years. And we're clear from the engagement that we've had with the Government and the Futures Trust that those risks are being understood and are being managed. Bernie?
Yeah, just to add, so obviously there's been that reduction in capital expenditure, and then at the same time the backlog of maintenance has increased, now sitting at across the NHS estate. So paragraph 35, we say 1.3 billion now, which is a 2% real terms increase since 2023. And we've heard from NHS boards that they've reported that there's an increased risk then to buildings failing, infrastructure risks, etc., and also issues around ageing and unproductive equipment, and that can obviously have operational impacts in terms of waiting lists and also bringing in new innovation, etc. And we understand that the new programme that's been put in place has been a response from government to some of those issues that have been raised by boards. So this whole wide range of projects that are being rolled out over the next couple of years to obviously make the estate fit for purpose.
Mention about patient safety. Is there any risks there in terms of reductions in capital expenditure? Because I know there's one or two fairly critical issues that you've highlighted.
There's a couple of things actually. One is about the immediate presenting risk, and one is the kind of perhaps some of the longer term risks about not investing in capital that kind of, I think, brings in some of the productivity questions. And if committee's time allows, maybe pass to Lee just to say a wee bit about some of the productivity implications. What we again reference maybe in terms of some of the presenting risks at paragraph 35, the 24 report on the state of the NHS estate identified backlog maintenance of £1.3 billion. 59 million of that, though, were high risk issues. That I think refers to, again, and then what's the response to that? So again, we set out paragraphs 37 in particular, some of the very specific actions that health boards are taking to address or invest to tackle some of those risks. Some of it's not always just about hospital equipment. Actually, some of it's, I think as we talk about at the Queen Elizabeth in Glasgow, of replacement fire doors. So, so these are a risk to patients, but really across the piece that have to be tackled. So aspects of that captured in the budget. Again, much of that will depend on what decisions Parliament takes in terms of investment as they considers the budget over the next couple of weeks. But the point about productivity is really important, actually, because it's complicated productivity, and that speaks to some of the wider issues in today's report. So although there's been more investment and more people working in the NHS, it's not yet directly translating into increases in activity or indeed outcomes. And investment in ageing and unproductive diagnostic equipment is one of the factors that came through in some of the evidence taking that we took during the course of the audit. Lee, maybe want to say just a word or two more about that.
Okay, thanks, Auditor General. In terms of patient safety, I think it's right that Healthcare Improvement Scotland, for example, have identified that ageing infrastructure, ageing buildings are having an impact on patient safety. And as the Auditor General has already pointed out, for example, fire safety procedures are part of that as well. And that has come out more and more in some of the inspections that they've carried out, and we outline that at paras 97 to 99 within the report. But in terms of productivity, as the Auditor General also said, we do know that a lack of investment in infrastructure is having an impact on levels of activity and productivity within the health service. And one of our recommendations in the report is that more is needed to be done, both by Scottish Government working with NHS boards to really understand what is affecting productivity. It's a complex area, but we know that, as we've talked about in the committee today, even with more money and more staff, we're not seeing the levels of activity and productivity that we would like to see. So we really need to try and do more focused work to try and understand why that's the case, and in that range of different things that impact on productivity, capital and lack of infrastructure, and new equipment is one of the major factors within that.
And just a brief question to finish up with medium and long-term health spending projections. Paragraph 45 it highlights that over the longer term, the SFC is projecting health and care spending to rise from 40% of devolved spending in 29-30 to 55% in 2074-75. Now, clearly that's unsustainable. Now, given the SFC have highlighted this and the impact on the long-term health of the population, which is central really to the sustainability of Scotland's public finances, do you have any insight into the kinds of reforms that could realistically be expected to help slow the growth in health spending and ease the pressure on Scotland's public finances?
I think this is really the essence of part 3 of today's report, that the Scottish Government has set out its high-level ambitions to invest in preventative measures that keeps people healthier for longer outside of a hospital setting. That is one of the key planks of having a sustainable model, but a healthier population. The one that is productive, can contribute to society and economically. As we go on to say in that part of the report, though, some of these ambitions aren't new. They've been around for many years. But to realise those ambitions, so we make recommendations really of ones of detail, Mr Beattie. They say what is going to be the key stages of implementation to deliver upon those ambitions. And importantly, it's the fact that these aren't just Scottish Government policies, they're shared with COSLA. And yes, they apply absolutely to local government, but they also apply to wider spheres, whether it's housing, education, private sector ambitions too. So we're clear that for the next 3, 6, 12 months, it's coming up with the detail of what is actually going to be done next to deliver upon the ambitions. And what we think these are welcome strategies, but absolutely key to address some of the challenges of today, but also some of the financial challenges that the Scottish Fiscal Commission have set out that will happen over the decades to come.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you, Colin. I'm now going to turn to Graham Simpson to put some questions to you. Graham.
Thanks, Convener. I'm aware of the time, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. I'm going to cover waiting times, and then I'll ask you about A&E performance, and probably in that section I'll ask about ambulances as well. But if we can start with waiting times, because the report, I think, paints quite a bleak picture on waiting times. If I can quote parts of it, and then we'll come to a question. In paragraph 53, you say that NHS boards are only meeting 3 of the 8 key waiting time standards that are currently reported. 5 of the 8 key waiting time standards have also seen a drop in performance from June 2024 to June 2025. No board met the planned care targets for the new outpatient standard that people referred for a new outpatient appointment should be seen within 12 weeks, or the treatment time guarantee that people should begin inpatient or day case treatment within 12 weeks of the decision to treat. So that doesn't sound like much of a guarantee to me. And then we look at paragraph 58 in your report, which says that the operational improvement plan, the government's plan, published in March 2025, committed to eliminating long waits and ensuring that no one is waiting longer than a year for a new outpatient appointment or inpatient day case procedure by March this year. And the report goes on to say that current figures show that long waits remain high and that it's unclear whether the target can be achieved in the stated time frame. And before I ask you about that, if I can also ask you just to look at Exhibit 10, because it's very relevant to this. And Exhibit 10 looks at commitments and progress on long waits. And I thought there were some quite alarming statistics there. So if we look at some previous targets, the length of wait to be eradicated, and these were commitments made in 2022. One of them has been met, only one of them has been met, and that's in outpatients, so waits of over 2 years. The commitment was by 31st of August 2022. They should be eliminated. That was met. But a whole series of others have not been met, and they appear to be refreshed, so that we have this new date of March 2026 where they should be met. But the waits in September last year, so for instance in outpatients, waits of over 18 months, 17,500 were on that waiting list. Waits of over a year, 56,439. In the inpatient sector, for over 2 years, 5,000 people were on that. Over 18 months, 13,000. Over a year, 29,417. So, question is, the government wants to eliminate waits of over a year by March. How realistic is that?
There is some, since we published in the beginning of December, you may be familiar, Mr Simpson, that Public Health Scotland is publishing now on a monthly basis some of the updated information. And I think the new detail to November came out just in the last day or so, that shows that overall waiting lists and waits of over a year, they're continuing to fall. And I think we've seen some of that trajectory. The ability, though, to deliver and clear these longer-term waits by March remains really challenging. I think, so there's been some, I think, I don't think I've got all the detail for all of the data that we have at Exhibit 10, but perhaps maybe just to draw out a couple of figures. So, for example, new outpatient waits over 52 weeks have fallen, what's now for the 4th consecutive month, down by 6,492 in October to November to 44,363. So I think you're seeing progress of addressing the ambition in the target and the work of the operational improvement plan. Whether all of these longer term waits can be met by March remains to be seen, and undoubtedly will be challenging to do so.
Well, it remains to be seen. We're only weeks away. So the reality is they're not going to be achieved.
It's not for me to say it will or won't be achieved. I don't think it changes the judgment that we made in the report. It's going to be really challenging to do so.
Very, very challenging. I mean, it would be lovely if it was to come about, but I really can't see it. Significant additional funding has been provided to reduce waiting lists, but as we've said, long waits remain high in many areas. Do you think there's any evidence that this investment is delivering improvements for boards?
I think there's some evidence to that effect. Again, maybe Bernie might want to say a bit more about, because what we looked at in the report, some of the detail at paragraph 61 and 62 of how has this additional investment been used. So what is the £135 million for this financial year, together with the £30 million that was part of the 24-25 budget being used? So, examples around targeting weights and ophthalmology, orthopaedics, urology, cancer services, diagnostics, expansion of imaging services, recruiting more staff, waiting list initiatives around additional clinics on weekends. So I think that it points to some of the statistics that we've just discussed, that the fewer people are waiting, the waits and the longer term waits are coming down, but I think it's that level of uncertainty as to whether it's actually going to deliver upon the target of March 26.
Okay. I'll move on then, in the interest of time. I'll ask you about A&E, because that's really, really important to folk. Now, in paragraph 80, you say, headline indicators show that performance in emergency departments is still poor. Performances against the 4-hour standard has remained around 70% nationally over the past year. The number of waits over 12 years in A&E increased to 76,000. Over 12 hours, that's incredible. In the year from August 2024 to July 2025, that's up 3%. Your report, yeah, so we've mentioned the 70%. So can you give us any other insight into why A&E targets are still being missed?
So you're right. It's one of the key performance measures that I'll come back to the paragraph you mentioned. I'll bring Lee in a second to say a bit more about some of the ambitions that the Scottish Government has in terms of addressing the totality of the complexity of tackling, people are presenting with urgent care needs at A&E. I think what's also the case, again, borne out Exhibit 9, is this is not entirely new set of circumstances. A&E performance, as we've drawn the trend from June 2019 to June of this year, only for a very short period, I think I think we maybe recall the early stages of COVID, what was the 95% target of people who had arrived at A&E being admitted, discharged or transferred within 4 hours. So some long-standing issues. Some of those are structural, that don't just apply to the performance of A&E departments, but also how the system is working. The flow, the patient flow of people through hospitals. A case of, are people presenting sicker, older, frailty? Are there care packages available? How is, are delays in leaving a hospital environment? And actually, as I mentioned earlier on in the session, Mr Simpson, the Council Commission and I have looked at with Audit Scotland some of the processes and challenges around delayed discharges that we'll be publishing tomorrow, and a chance to explore that in more detail with the committee. But the pressures, I think, as we say at 82, are really indicative of some of the wider pressures within the health and social care system. You'd mentioned that you wanted to come back to ambulances and so on, so I won't cover that just now, but actually I'll maybe bring Lee in actually to say a bit more about some of the A&E service factors.
Thank you, Auditor General. A&E continues to struggle. I looked at the latest available data. So, for example, by the end of November, people being seen within 4 hours was at about 66.7%. So it is still struggling. It's a range of factors, really, as the Auditor General's hinted at, and the delayed discharge report is out tomorrow, but it is to do with high occupancy levels within hospitals, and that's to do with the flow through hospitals, because when people come into A&E to be able to be transferred or treated, they need to be, often need to be given a hospital bed. So if those hospital beds aren't available, then that means that A&E backs up. They are overcrowded. The Healthcare Improvement Scotland inspections show that A&E are overcrowded, and people are remaining in A&E for longer than they should be. There is a range of different initiatives being put in place to try and deal with the pressures on A&E, the flow navigation centres that we've talked about before in terms of diverting people away from accident and emergency services. But the recent evaluation, there is a range of areas that still need improvement. So, for example, there still needs to be more standardised and a greater range of places that people can be diverted to improve those flow navigation centres and their ability. The other thing that was mentioned within the operational improvement plan was about frailty units and having access to frailty units and being able to divert particularly frail and vulnerable older people away from accident and emergency. But we do know that the progress that was intended for those frailty units has not been as quick as intended due to the money not being available and staff not being able to be recruited. So again, that's just adding to the pressures on A&E.
So we've not been able to open enough of them, is that the case?
Yes, in enough giving accident and emergency units access to frailty units, and or advice from frailty specialists, and being able to divert people elsewhere. I guess initiatives like hospital at home and things like that.
Do you know what the plan was? I mean, how many of these units were anticipated?
The intention was that by last summer that all accident and emergency units would have access to frailty support.
One. And how many actually have one?
I don't have that. I think that will be covered in the delayed discharge report that's due out tomorrow. There will be there will be much more detail about progress with those frailty units.
Okay, that's fine. Now, you, Lee, mentioned flow navigation centres, so I'll ask about that before I just close on ambulances, because this is, if we're trying to find solutions, then this is a possible solution. Diverting people away from A&E, people who don't need to go to A&E, that's the idea, and it looked to me like there's been some success. If I look in my own patch, in NHS Lanarkshire, they've set this system up in the first 19 weeks of having it. So that was April to November 2024. The Flow Navigation Centre in Lanarkshire took over 30,000 calls, and nearly 5,000 patients were sent out. Well, basically sent elsewhere, rather than A&E. So do you think that there's the opportunity for these kind of centres to be rolled out across the country?
Yes, absolutely. And most areas do have a flow navigation centre now. I mean, they do vary in terms of their success. We have reported on flow navigation centres before, and they have been hugely successful in diverting the number. The volume of people in A&E is lower than it used to be. Unfortunately, it's just that flow through the hospital that's still making the times that people, the time spent in A&E longer than it should be. But as we've said there, the recent evaluation of the reform of urgent care made some recommendations that could improve some of those flow navigation centres. For example, reducing the time to answer for NHS 24, for example, was seen as an area that could be improved, because that's often people's access into these flow navigation centres is through NHS 24. And as I've already talked about, also then giving the flow navigation centres a greater range and standardising the different options to divert people to. So the things that we've talked about, hospital at home, frailty units, that kind of thing, rather than people turning up at A&E. So if we could expand those options, then it just gives more options to the flow navigation centre in terms of diverting people away from A&E.
So if I can just finish on ambulances, because this is a serious problem. You say in 83, paragraph 83, the long-term aim for handover of patient conveyed to hospital by ambulance is 15 minutes. But in August of last year, the average was an hour. So people sat outside hospital for an hour on average. So ambulances getting stuck outside hospitals means crew can't get away to see other emergencies, quite obviously. So people waiting for those emergencies are waiting longer because the ambulances are stuck outside hospital, and that increases the risk to the people who are waiting for a new call. So it's a kind of vicious circle, isn't it? And obviously one of the causes of that is overcrowding in A&E, which we've just discussed. So what do you think is the solution to all this?
So I guess it's the totality of what we've just been discussing, isn't it? This is the presenting symptom of hospitals not being able to receive ambulances, people being handed over within 15 minutes. So if you're hovering about an hour, there is the backlog. I think, as you and Lee have been discussing, the flow navigation centres, the frailty centres, keeping people out of A&E, the longer-term ambitions of reform are central to tackling some of the issues of today. And I guess that's why we are so clear on the need for the Scottish Government and the health boards to avoid some of the issues of years gone by in terms of new strategies and approaches that, in terms of shifting that balance and keeping people healthier and out of hospital, come up with the detail now that really matters to underpin the strategies both in the short term and the longer term, Mr Simpson. But I think we'd agree that the presenting issue of ambulances not being able to discharge patient is symptomatic of some of those wider pressures in the system to be addressed.
Convener, I'll leave it there, and I look forward to reading the report on delayed discharges.
Yep, thank you. That's out from midnight tonight, I think, Auditor General, isn't it? If you want to stand by your fax machine for it to come through. I'm now going to invite Joe Fitzpatrick to put some final questions to you. Joe.
Thanks, Convener. I'll try and keep this as tight as I can. The first area I was wanting to ask about was digital access. And obviously, there's been a huge amount of work ongoing, for a number of years around digital access. And I think in my personal interaction with the NHS and my health service, and I use a portal to ask my GP for repeat prescriptions. I go online to the Scot Blood to get an appointment to donate blood, and along with many other people of my age and older. It's a web-based system. If the NHS appointment for winter vaccination isn't appropriate, I can go online and fix that. But we still haven't got that, pulling that all together in an app, as we can see elsewhere in the UK. So your report in 127 highlights that the mycare.scot app was to be rolled out in December, initially in Lanarkshire, and then potentially to the rest of Scotland by April. Good to hear if that still is your understanding of where that is going. But in 129, you also highlight a concern that there hasn't been a full business case and budget attached to that. So is that concerning, or do you expect us to get all that next week?
That'll be a decision for yourselves and the Parliament to determine how the resources are allocated. I think it's important to recognise that the service renewal framework, as well as the importance of the mycare.scot app, is that digital services, of course, are going to play a much more fundamental part of the delivery of health and social care services, whether it's the investment in capital that we've talked about and the updating of equipment, the ease with which patients and their families can access services in a way that is convenient to them. Pulling this all together, it'll be probably an expensive, large time scale project. So the mycare app, I think, as you mentioned, we've the business case to be approved, and it'll be a matter for the Parliament next week to consider about the funding allocation. A couple of things that may be relevant is, one, we reference here just the report that the committee considered from the Accounts Commission now on tackling digital exclusion. So it won't be the route for everybody, and just ensuring that equity of service. But also I'm reminded, Mr Fitzpatrick, of some of the evidence also that the committee took from GPs on the GP contract report from a number of months ago now, that how all the system is working together is also going to really matter. That it's important to have an app, but also that the other end works well with GP independent contractors that they are across the system, and that level of investment is sustained so that the whole system operates effectively. I'll pause actually just to check in with colleagues if we've heard anything further about the Lanarkshire rollout.
We haven't heard, as far as we're aware. It was still to be rolled out, but it was just quite a small pilot within Lanarkshire, and then to be rolled out much further later this year. So we will obviously keep an eye on that, but there is no doubt it's going to be a kind of ongoing process to try and increase the capability of that app. And to make it work and do everything that we would like it to do.
Covered my next question about digital exclusion, but I guess across the points there, and 128, you talk about how, well, it's quite limited just now what the app's going to do, potential for it to do much more. And I guess this goes back to some extent to the point that a colleague made about A&E being appropriately used. One of the big tools that we've got in our toolkit is the Pharmacy First, which I think has now been adopted in the rest of the UK, following on from Scotland's launch many years ago. But for that to be really effective, pharmacists need to be able to access someone's health data. And do we think that we're going to get there in a time that pharmacists are itching to be able to work to their max and take the pressure off the rest of the system? Is this app going to be able to do that, do we think?
It's not something that we've looked into, I think, in that level of detail, but we do know that I mean, what the app should be able to do is give individuals access eventually to their health data. So obviously they would then have the option to be able to share that with the pharmacist. In terms of other people, we know it is again an ambition in terms of that sharing of health information across both health and social care. That's again been a long-term ambition of digital within health and care in Scotland, but there are still a number of hurdles to be overcome in terms of that sharing of data that aren't quite there yet.
Just for completeness, Mr Fitzpatrick, it's something we'll continue to factor into our forward work programme, actually, as we think about the next iteration of these reports. And given how significant digital investment, my care, yes, but really the other planks of it too, is something that I imagine and expect will be part of our future reporting.
Just to wrap up, because I know time is really tight, we had a few questions here around the service renewal framework and the population health framework, both of which are frameworks which the NHS is taking forward in partnership with COSLA, and that's really important. I think that happens. So just, I guess, to give you the opportunity to reflect on whether you think that these things are going in the direction that we would hope to, or is there further changes and improvements needed to the frameworks?
I don't know if it necessarily I would say that there's need for any changes to frameworks. We've welcomed both the operational improvement plan, the service renewal framework and the population health framework. They set out the ambitions to move to a preventative based model in terms of better outcomes, but also, as we touched on earlier with Mr Beattie, about a financially sustainable approach that for the future. At the risk of repeating myself, these aren't new though. We've stated many times as a country this is the approach we want to take. We haven't been able to deliver upon it. What we need is to give us the best chance of success is some of that underpinning architecture. The detailed plans, how spending is going to change, how it's going to be measured, what our outcome expectations are. So there are, cautious optimism, I think is probably as far as I would go today to say these are important steps, but need to be supported by some of the detailed implementation now.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. No shortage of challenge, and I'm sure that we will consider as a committee whether we want to put some of these challenges to the government's own representative as the accountable officer in future weeks. But for the purposes of today, can I draw things to a close? Can I thank you, Bernie Milligan, Lee Johnson, Auditor General, for the evidence that you've been able to present to us this morning. And as I say, we will consider what our next steps are. Just to formally, as agreed by the committee, move the next session of the committee's business into private.